What's up everybody, welcome back to the VMP Performance channel. My name's JD, and in today's video we're covering the full installation of the VMP Gen 6 3.0 liter supercharger kits for the 24 Mustang. This includes stage 1 and stage 2 kits. We'll annotate exactly when we're working on something that's specific to stage 1 or specific to stage 2. So when you receive your supercharger kit, it's going to come in two boxes, labeled 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. In box 2 of 2, there's going to be a box that says instructions inside. Grab that box out and you're going to find your Tomahawk device as well as instructions specific to that device. You're going to want to follow those instructions and go ahead and create your request CAL file so the tune can be put together for you. You'll do that right up front so that the wait time between supercharger kit installation complete and your tune file coming in, that'll all line up and you can fire your vehicle right up as soon as you're done. Let's go ahead and jump on the car. Before actually working on the engine, we're going to relieve the fuel pressure in the system and consume the fuel that's in the rails to avoid fuel leaks. You do this by disconnecting the fuel pump driver module. This is located underneath the driver's side rear seat. You'll find on the seat there is a couple of gaps you'll fill when you run your hand across the front. We're going to show you that in just a moment. That'll allow you to unlatch and remove that seat. You'll take your hand, you'll drag it across the front. You're going to feel a little gap about right there. Push down on the seat and hit the little button there to push. You'll notice it come up. You'll do that on both sides. Once you've released those clips, the seat lifts right up. So go ahead and lift it up and remove it from the vehicle. Once your rear seat's removed, this right here is your fuel pump driver module located right by this trim panel. You'll grab this gray clip and disconnect it. Once the fuel pump driver module is disconnected, you'll run the car until it stalls. Once the vehicle stalls, you'll attempt to start it one more time to consume the last little bit of fuel. As you see and heard, it started briefly and then shut back off, so give it one more time. And you'll continue to do that until it no longer actually starts. Now that we have the vehicle's fuel rails drained, we can go ahead and plug back in the fuel pump driver module. Now we're going to disconnect the battery, and that's done with 3 clips here. So we'll spin these and loosen them up. Now that your 3 clips are out, the panel should lift and pull forward. Once you've removed the cover, you can loosen the two 10mm that will loosen the battery cables. Then you want to pop off the cables and tuck them away where they won't come into contact with the terminals. Now we're going to begin the process of removing the front fascia. You're going to have 4 clips that you need to undo on each side on a GT. On a Dark Horse, you're going to have a couple of additional clips right up here where a brake vent will be that you'll need to undo as well. There's 2 additional for the Dark Horse. Let's go ahead and pop these out. You'll take a small flathead screwdriver and you'll lift the clip. Once you lift the center section out, the rest of the clip will come out. 3 and 4. And you will repeat this process on the other side. Next, you're going to grab the 12 7mm bolts around the perimeter of the chin spoiler. It'll be these 12 here. Once you remove the 12 7mm bolts from the front chin spoiler, you're going to have 10 additional that go around the perimeter and 2 in the center here. That's the total of 10. And then you've got 3 push clips here. You'll need to take those out. I'm going to start with the push clips. If you find yourself struggling a little bit, you can always grab a trim tool, and that'll help finesse it the rest of the way out. It's worth taking your time and not tearing these clips up so you can reuse them. Once all your hardware is removed, the under tray comes right out. Next, you'll disconnect the bumper mounted side marker lamps. You'll just grab the clip and pull it out, and you'll do this on both sides. The passenger side is a little tighter to get to as it's up by the ECU. Then you'll disconnect the front bumper electrical connector. It's on the driver's side at the end of the frame rail here. Next, to remove the bumper cover on each side, you're going to have two 10mm bolts and a Christmas tree style push-in clip that you'll undo on both sides. Now that we've got the four 10mm bolts out, we're going to use a plastic trim tool and a microfiber cloth to get in here and separate the Christmas tree clip. So you'll just wrap this to protect your paint, and you scoot it right in this gap here and lightly pry. And as you pry, you'll feel that Christmas tree clip starting to come undone, and that's how you'll get your bumper to pop down. And you'll feel it release. There it went, right there. We're going to repeat this on the other side. Now we'll remove the 8 pins. These are plastic push clips that are holding on the radiator cover. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You'll use a flat-headed and you'll use a trim removal tool as needed. There will be 7 7mm bolts across the front of the fascia. You'll now undo these. Once the 7 fasteners are out, at each end of the weather stripping, you're going to have a push clip holding this on. So you get up under here with your trim removal tool and lift that out. It may slip out of the weather stripping. You can still remove the clip and reuse it and reinstall it back into that weather stripping. Now you may very carefully lift off your front fascia. Once the front fascia is off, you can go ahead and disconnect your ambient air temperature sensor. Then on each side of the active grille shutter system, you've got ducting, and each one of those ducts is held on by 4 retainers located here, here, right here, and then one here at the bottom, and on the other side, in the same locations, here and here, here, and right here. I'm going to put you back up on the tripod and get those retainers out. To do this without damaging any of the retainers or the plastic ducting, you'll want to use something like a trim tool. Next, we'll disconnect the CCM sensor and place the harness out of the way by removing 3 trim clips, here, here, and here. Now it's disconnected. You'll run it through that slot and pop out using your trim tool these 3 trim locations and set it aside, kind of out of the way. To remove the active grille shutters, you're going to have 6 8mm bolts. You have 2 in the top, 2 in the middle, and 2 in the bottom. To finish removing the active grille shutters, you're going to have a bar that connects the bottom to the top. I'm sorry, I blocked the light. Connects the bottom to the top here, and it's got a single 5.5mm bolt. You'll pull that bolt out to get it the rest of the way out. Once the bolt's out, you can unclip the bar from the bottom, and then your active shutters should slide right out. You'll have one harness in the top that you'll unclick with a couple of Christmas tree style clips on it before it'll come the rest of the way out. Now that the active grille shutter system is out of the vehicle, we're going to start by making some modifications to this system. First, we're going to take the upper linkage that's connected by 8 snaps here on the top. We're going to get this disconnected. We'll just do so by unsnapping this linkage off each one of the vanes. And taking the upper linkage out. Once the upper linkage is out, you can go through and remove each one of the vanes. You're going to notice a tab here that they're popped into. Take a small flathead, grab a hold of that tab, and pry. That'll release the end of it, and you can lift the vane out. You'll do that for all 8 of the upper vanes. You'll then repeat this process for the lower with one additional step. You have a link bar here. This pops out, so you'll pop that out. Just set it right here. And you've got 6 tabs. You'll disconnect these 6 tabs that link the vanes together and remove that bar. Then for these 6 vanes, you have 6 more tabs that the vanes connect into. You'll just use that same flat blade screwdriver, lift it out so the vane can be removed. Last but not least, in regards to your active grille shutter system, you're going to remove the actuator itself. You're going to use a Torx T20 to remove the single bolt right here on the actuator. Once that's out, the actuator comes right out. That concludes the modifications you're going to make to the active grille shutter system for now, so set it aside for reinstallation later. So now we're going to release the trim clips on the cowl panel to gain access to the bolts that would be for your strut tower brace, as well as this rear trim panel here. You'll notice this car is not equipped with a strut tower brace, but the process is very similar. I'll point out what's a little bit different on a car that has the strut tower brace in the process of removing this. Let's go ahead and jump on removing these clips. There'll be 6 plastic clips. Take care not to lose these, as you will use them to reinstall your cowl panel. You want to use a small flathead screwdriver and a trim removal tool as not to damage these clips as you pull them out. Once the 6 clips are out, you'll be able to tip this up to gain access to the 13mm bolts that are underneath the plastic cowl. Once the trim clips are removed, you can start removing the bolts that fasten the strut tower brace and or this trim panel in. You'll lift off this plastic connector that holds your battery cable there. Make sure it doesn't come in contact with the battery post. Then using a 15mm socket, you'll break these 2 bolts loose and remove them. Then you'll swap to a 13mm socket to remove these 2 13s here. Underneath your cowl panel, this plastic trim piece, you've got 2 additional 13s. You use something plastic, wood, or foam to prop this up. And you'll grab a hold of a 13mm ratcheting wrench, as that'll make this much easier to access these last 2 bolts. And take care not to drop them back into the drip tray. Now that all the hardware is removed, you can take what you're using to lift the cowl panel out of its place. You lift that up and move it out of the way. And then this trim piece here will tip forward. You'll go to the other side. You'll lift it off the 2 struts, or 2 studs on the strut tower. Once that's off of there, this comes right out. For those of you with vehicles equipped with an actual strut tower brace, there'll be 3 additional bolts that you'll remove. You'll have 1 more 13 that's located approximately right here. And then you have your 2 15mm nuts. Those will be the only additional things that you'll need to remove the strut tower brace. Now you'll remove your engine cover by just lifting gently until you feel it release. All right, now we're going to take down the fluid levels in the cooling system so that we don't make a huge mess as we start to open these systems up. We're going to use a fluid evacuator to do this, so you go ahead and remove your cap. Make sure the vehicle's cool, of course. The last thing you want to do is catch yourself a scald from opening a hot system. You'll remove your cap and put your evacuator line in there. Once your bottle's empty, we're going to move over to the passenger side heater line to drain even further. So now we're over here at the passenger side heater core line. This line runs right here. We're going to remove this line to gain access behind the water pump to continue to drain down our coolant level to avoid making a mess. Grab yourself a rag of some sort just in case some tries to spill when you remove this line. This is a quick connector, so there'll be 2 tabs that you'll grab with your fingers as you push in on the line and then pull out to remove it. So push down on it, grab the clips, and then lift up, grab your rag, capture the mess there. You can just kind of set that to the side with the rag around it so it doesn't spill a bunch of engine coolant, and then use your fluid evacuator to grab the fluid out of this side. Once that's done draining, you can go ahead and remove your fluid evacuator. So now we'll begin the process of removing the air intake tubes from the intake manifold. You start with a mass airflow sensor. It's got a white locking tab. You'll pull that back and then squeeze the tab itself. Push in a little bit to release the tension, and you'll be able to slide the plug off of there. Then you've got a Christmas tree style clip that hooks it to the tube, so disconnect that and set it aside. Now we're going to remove the makeup air tube out of the vacuum system off of this intake tube. It is quick connect. There's a little flat spot that'll be on a black clip here. You'll push that and it'll spread the claws. You push that and slip it off. We're going to repeat a very similar process over on the driver's side intake tube. On the mass airflow sensor, you'll slide that clip back, press on the clip itself. That'll release. The Christmas tree clip will pop out of the tube. You'll set that aside. On the PCV tube here, you'll notice a light blue clip in it. There's a tab on the bottom side. You'll use your finger to actuate that tab and you'll be able to slip it right off. Once the lines and sensors are disconnected from the intake tubes, you'll take a 7mm socket and go ahead and release the worm gear clamps that hold them to the throttle bodies. And now we'll remove the airbox lids. There's 2 clips on the front of each that you'll just actuate with your fingers, tip up and pull forward. They'll slot right out. Each mass airflow sensor has a 10mm bolt that holds the MAF housing to the airbox. You'll remove that bolt. Once the worm gear clamp and the 10mm bolts removed, you should be able to lift the intake tube out. You rotate off the throttle body and lift straight out. Now we're going to disconnect the wiring harnesses from the throttle bodies. You're going to notice a red clip here. You'll pop that clip out of place. There's a little tab behind it that you'll press. That little black tab will release the plug from the throttle body. You do that on both of these. On the back of the driver's side throttle body, the wiring harness has a Christmas tree plug that connects it to the intake manifold. You're going to want to disconnect this plug from the back of here to separate the wiring harness from the intake manifold itself. And you can just run it under the heater hose to get it out of the way. So now we're going to remove the heater hoses and get them out of the way for the intake to come out. I'll slide this PCV down. We've cheated. When we drained the coolant earlier, we actually already disconnected that line, so it's out of the way. You'll just make sure it's pushed over on the passenger side. On the driver's side, you'll see it lays here with a retainer. First thing we're going to do is use the quick connect clip here. You'll squeeze the 2 white parts and then pull out. It can be a little bit stubborn. You push in, grab the clip there, and then remove the heater line. Lean it up here out of the way so it doesn't obstruct your ability to remove the intake. And then there's a retainer here on this bolt. You'll slide it up and then move this line up and out of the way. I like kind of putting it over here by the brake master cylinder. Your coolant should already be drained low enough to not be pouring out. So you'll just take these lines and spread them out away from the engine to get them out of your way. Now we're moving on to removing the fuel lines from the vehicle. So grab yourself a rag. Now there should be very minimal pressure on these rails because we purged the system earlier by disconnecting the fuel pump driver module and starting the car. But it's always good to have gloves and a rag to catch any excess that may come out of the rail. So on the DI side of things, on the passenger side, this clip you'll squeeze the back side and push it through. Once it's through, take your rag under here to catch and slide it off. Now, good, we didn't have any burst of pressure or anything there. And make sure it's not dripping or anything. Let's move over to the main feed line on the driver's side. On the driver's side, the clip's a little bit different, but if you take your hand and you rotate it around, you'll see a little notch where you can place a screwdriver. So take a small screwdriver and lift up on the clip there. You'll see the clip move. Be gentle, you don't want to break this clip. And once it's up and out of the way, you take a rag so you can catch any excess fuel, put it under there, and lightly pull it off. Make sure no fuel's dripping or anything of that nature, then you can set it to the side. So now we're going to remove the heater hose supports from the intake manifold. There's 4 10mm nuts. On the driver's side, we're going to knock these 2 off. And there is a clip that the evap purge solenoid connects to. We're going to push down on that tab and slide it out to separate it from the heater hose support. Then we'll slip over to the passenger side. We'll then remove these 2 10mm nuts. And I notice that there's a couple of Christmas tree clips connected to this. You'll just pull them off. Maybe easier to rotate it up so you can see the bottom of the clip and use a screwdriver to unclip it. There you go. Once the heater hose supports are out of the way, you can go ahead and remove the isolating foam from the fuel rails. You just lift it up, it'll come off. I wanted to pop you off the tripod for a second because we're going to disconnect all the connectors that are around the fuel rails. So you've got the 4 injectors, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fuel rail pressure sensor, so that's 5. 2 sensors on the IMRCs, so that'll make 7. And then you've got 4 more fuel injectors, 1, 2, 3, and 4, for a total of 11 connectors you're going to disconnect from the fuel rails. Let's get those 11 connectors undone. And that's all 11 right there. Now we'll remove the 4 bolts holding down the fuel rails. These are 10 mils. They're located here, 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 and here. These are longer and go down in the cylinder head. Now we can undo the hardware that fastens the intake manifold itself to the engine. There's 6 8mm bolts, 3 on each side. You would need an extension and an 8mm to get to them. They'll be located at the front, roughly the middle, and the back of the intake manifold down at the base of it. We're nearly ready to remove the intake manifold. We're going to disconnect a few of the last air lines that are connected to the front of it before we tip it up. So you have the EVAP purge here. You'll see a little notch in the clip where you use a small flathead to release that clip, and then lift up and set to the side. You're going to see a PCV line going to the passenger side. There'll be a little tab here you'll grab with your fingertip and lift up. You can go ahead and take the line all the way off to avoid damaging it. So the same principle of a little tab that you move to the side. Remove that line and set it to the side. Now that the last of the connections have come off the front of the intake manifold, you should be able to lift and rock it forward to gain access to the back of it. There's going to be 2 electrical connectors and 2 push clips, like push-in clips, that you're going to have to remove there. I can't show them to you on camera because they're behind here, but once I have the intake manifold out, I'll turn it around and show you what I disconnected. I've nominated my buddy Luke here to help disconnect these things as I tip it forward. There's going to be two push clips, like Christmas tree style clips, and 2 electrical connectors. He's going to get 1 on that side as well as both plugs, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit to my side and grab the other Christmas tree. We've also removed the fuel rails to avoid spilling fuel, but now the intake manifold can come right out. So now's a good time to go ahead and wipe up any fuel or anything that might have spilled while rocking things around. And prepare yourself to cover the intake ports for the rest of the work you're going to be doing here. Now we're looking at the intake manifold outside of the vehicle, with this side being the passenger side and this side being the driver's side. When you're reaching behind it to unplug things, you're going to be unplugging this map sensor back here, as well as this IMRC sensor. And then you're going to have a Christmas tree style plug, just a clip that you got to pop out right here and over here. Now before going any further, we're actually going to use some painter's tape and cover the intake ports, just to prevent anything from falling in there. Now we've got our intake ports covered up, we'll keep moving. Now that the intake manifold is out of the way, we'll go ahead and remove these spacers. And now's a good time to inspect for any debris or anything of that nature and clean it up really, really well before the blower goes on. Now that we've got the intake manifold and intake tubes out of the way, we've got a little bit more space. We're gonna go ahead and remove the lower portions of the air boxes to make room for us to work and install our belt drive system. On the driver's side, you've got a 10mm bolt here. You should be able to grab your airbox and lift and rotate out. On the passenger side, you've got a relay that's on the front of the BCM here. We're going to use a small screwdriver and release that clip to lift up. We're going to slide it out of the way briefly so that we can access the 10mm bolt here. I've got that 10mm out. Grab the box, lift, push forward to clear, and then rotate up and out. Once it's out, just to keep things kind of organized, you can take your relay, slide it back in place. You'll just have to move it when you go to reinstall the box. Now we're starting on the belt drive system, but before we remove the belt, we're actually going to loosen the water pump pulley bolts. It's a 10mm, and we're going to use a longer ratcheting style wrench to get in here and get these broken loose while the belt tension is still on. Once that's broken loose, you'll take a 15mm on a breaker bar, or if you've got a long ratcheting wrench with a 15mm end, You'll use that to actuate the tensioner to release the belt. So you take your breaker bar and your 15, you reach down here and grab a hold of that tensioner. You'll pry towards the passenger side and then slip the belt off of the alternator, and that'll release it from there. Then you can release the tension off the tensioner and remove your tool and then remove the belt. Now after removing your belt, you're going to go ahead and remove the spring-loaded tensioner from the timing cover. You'll take a 13 mil. Now we'll go ahead and remove the water pump pulley. This will be reused, so save your bolts, set them aside with the pulley. So in your kit, you're going to find a set of 8 spark plugs, the Motorcraft SP581Xs. You're going to take these and you're going to gap them to 31 thousandths and get them installed. And this is a great time to do so because pretty much everything's out of the way. So let's get this knocked out real quick. So the process of gapping your plugs is actually pretty simple. We're using a pretty common gap tool that you can get off like Amazon and a set of feeler gauges. So spin your plug in there. And get it where the electrode's facing out towards you. Take your feeler gauge and check where it's currently at. It's a little bit loose, so I'm going to give it just a little bit of a squeeze. And then release the tension and check it again. And actually, they're pretty close out of the box, but you definitely want to check them. But that right there, where there's just a little bit of drag, it doesn't go in too easy, but it also isn't pinched in there. We're dead on, so you're going to do that for all 8 plugs and then get them installed. So I'll show you everything about doing one of these plugs, and then we'll just ramp it through because you'll repeat this procedure on the other 7 spark plugs. You use an 8mm socket and you'll remove the coil bolt. Just get that bolt out. You'll unlock the clip, squeeze the clip to unplug the coil, and then gently remove it. You're going to grab your 5/8" spark plug socket on an extension. Actually, you can just go ahead and take that off the wrench, slide it down in there and get it into place. Once it's in place, I'm actually going to grab another extension just to make it a little bit easier on me. So I grabbed the second extension. Shouldn't be super tight. It'll break loose. You can then pop the wrench off and spin it out. Once you feel it loosen up, gently pull out your OEM plug. You'll then grab one of your gapped forward part number SP518 plugs, place it in your spark plug socket, and very gently guide it back down into place. You'll spin by hand until you feel it kind of bite, and I just go ahead and spin it all the way until I feel it seat. Now the plug itself needs to be torqued down to 128 inch-pounds. You take your inch-pound torque wrench, set to 128 inch-pounds, and there it is. It's your click. Now you're going to repeat that for all 8 spark plugs. So the next thing we're going to knock out is getting the water neck replaced here. We've got a little bit lower profile one that accepts a 45-degree nipple for this line here. So let's go ahead and get this torn apart. Use a pair of pliers, and up here, and grab your hose clamp, slide it up. You'll be able to slip your hose off, slide it out of the way, and you've got 2 8mm bolts to break loose to get the water neck free. But before we break that loose, we're going to actually go ahead and loosen this larger clamp as well and get it pushed back. So we've got it locked back. We can scoot it back out of the way. Then we'll grab these 2 bolts and rip them out. Now you will reuse these bolts, so hang on to them. So slip both of these up out of the way. Allows you to loosen this. You hang on to those bolts. We're going to use a little hook to break this hose loose from this real quick, just to keep us from having to wrestle so much and potentially busting a knuckle or something. And you're doing it this way to avoid harming the plastic Y. You pop that out, and you're going to retain this O-ring to put it in the new water neck. If you grab a good pick, you'll be able to get in here and pop that right out. You take your new water neck, you line the shapes in there, drop your O-ring in place. So we're going to keep this hose kind of out of the way. You're going to replace this clamp with a worm gear clamp that you're going to slip in this way for clearance. Scoot this in place and drop it down. Grab the shorter of the two bolts. Go ahead and start that. And then grab your longer of the two bolts. Go ahead and start that. Grab your tool to expedite. We'll take the 45-degree elbow and some pipe sealant. So once you've applied your thread sealant on your 45, you'll go and you'll thread this in and get it installed. It needs to face in this general direction. So you'll grab an appropriate sized wrench. In this case, it's going to be a 14. Spin it around and get it good and tight and pointed in this direction. Next, we're going to modify the degas line. First and foremost, we're going to remove the OEM constant tension clamp. And we're going to replace that momentarily with a worm gear clamp. We do need to make a trim on this line. You're going to notice there is an ENG text. You cut right above that. And we're doing this for clearance to the supercharger. Get rid of my slack there. We'll then take our worm gear clamp, and it's important the orientation that you place it on here. So when you place it on, you want the bolt towards the bottom. You'll then slide it on here like so. And grab your tool and tighten her up. There we go. So before we button up this hose here, we've actually got a few more cooling modifications to the hoses that we have to do specific to the automatic transmission. First and foremost, we're going to pop this little plastic clamp here that holds this line in place, and then we're going to remove this clamp. So now we're going to disconnect the automatic transmission fluid solenoid from the timing cover. There's a stud that's in the front of the timing cover here, and it's a 13mm nut that we're going to get off of here to start this process. Get your tool down in here and on that 13. Once the first nut is off, we're going to then disconnect the wiring harness. And it's got another nut up here. We're going to slide that harness off of the stud that it's on, just so we have access to the nut here. You grab your tool. I'm going to take the extension off. Get here on this one. I'm going to break it loose and then spin it free. I'll let the hardware drop, and we can slide that back off of the stud. Once you've removed the transmission fluid valve from the timing cover, you have the stud that's still remaining. That needs to come out because it will not be reused, so you use an 18mm socket to break that loose and remove it from the timing cover. Now we're going to modify the U-shaped hose. The U-shaped hose is located right here at the bottom of this T and goes to this T here. We're going to disconnect from this place here and move 1 3/4 inches of length from this hose, and then relocate the entire T's position to in front of the radiator hose to keep it out of the water pump, pulley, and belt drive. These hoses can be a little bit stubborn, so using a pick or a screwdriver to work them loose off of their connections can assist in a great way. Instead of fully removing it from the car, we're actually going to leave it in place to avoid a spill, make our measurement, and then take a cut. So 1 3/4 inches is about down to here. Set aside the slack from your cut. I'm going to scoot to the other side of the T here and install the hose. Then we'll get the clamp back in place in just a moment. Once your cut has been made and the hose has been reinstalled, you'll then grab your constant tension clamp and reinstall it up at the top of the hose. Once you've completed the modifications of the U-hose, you can now go ahead and tighten up the worm gear clamp that you replaced the constant tension clamp with up on the primary radiator hose. So now we're beginning the installation of the belt drive system. It's going to involve removing 4 factory bolts and relocating 1 ground. The bolts you're going to move will be this 1 water pump bolt, this timing cover bolt, this timing cover bolt, and relocating this ground and stud to this position here. And you've got 1 additional bolt down here that I'll change camera angles and show you when I go to move that one. Let's go ahead and get this hardware moving. So those 3 fasteners are all 10 mils. When you go to relocate this ground, the stud behind it is a 13 millimeter. You're going to relocate this stud to this top timing cover position. Once you've relocated the stud, go ahead and reinstall your ground. And reinstall the 10 millimeter nut that holds that ground to the stud. And make sure to adjust it so it doesn't come in conflict with any other components. The last timing cover bolt you're going to remove is located right here. It is a 10 millimeter as well. So now it's time to install the supplied idler plate. You're going to install 4 of these 90 mil long M8 6 millimeter hex headed bolts into this position, this position, this position, and this position. This will install in the positions that you removed hardware from in the timing cover. You'll start these by hand. Once installed, you'll torque them to 22 foot-pounds. So now it's time to assemble our adjustable idler and install it in place of the spring-loaded tensioner you removed earlier. The parts included for the adjustable idler include the idler body itself, a smooth idler. You're going to reuse the factory bolt that held the spring tensioner onto the timing cover. We have a 390 thousandths tall step spacer. You're going to have a bolt here. This one is a 1/2 inch by 13 by 1 3/4. You'll notice this in your hardware pack. You're going to have the small spacer here as a shim, and you'll have the slider that goes in the back of the tensioner. When you install this in the tensioner, you're going to want the threaded hole on the top side of it. So let's get this put together and install it on the vehicle. So now we're going to go ahead and assemble this tensioner body. So first thing you're going to do is take your smooth idler and your stepped spacer, put that together. You're going to take your slide, put it in the tensioner with the hole, the threaded hole on the top side. You're going to hold that in place. Grab your small spacer and the bolt, run it together and assemble that by hand. You'll spin that in, and you'll take your OEM bolt and you'll place it in the tensioner body. So let's go ahead and get this on the timing cover. So you're going to take the assembled tensioner, drop your OEM bolt in, and take note of your dowel pin here. There's a hole in the timing cover that'll align in so that this is locked in one position. So when you go down here to the timing cover, you're going to notice your dowel pin hole here. That's where the dowel pin in the back of the tensioner is going to go. And then you have your threaded hole here where that OEM bolt's going to go. So slip down here with the tensioner, kind of line the bolt up, press the tensioner against the timing cover and hold it in place, and start the bolt by hand. Once you've got it started by hand, it should sit in place so you can grab a tool to tighten that up. The socket you'll use is a 13 millimeter socket. Then grab a tool so you can go ahead and cinch it down. To tighten the smooth idler, it's a 3/8 hex. So before moving forward with installing the rest of the belt drive system, we're going to make some adjustments to our auto trans fluid solenoid here. It's got a factory bracket on it. We're going to remove that bracket in preparation to install the one provided. We're going to be using a T20 socket. So let's go ahead and get these 4 bolts out and get the bracket off. The solenoid has 2 bolts on each side, which you'll need to remove. So when you go to remove the solenoid from the bracket, you'll note that there's some dowels and slots for them. You'll slide the solenoid up and out so you don't do any damage to the solenoid itself once you remove the bracket. So now we're going to go ahead and install our belt tensioner. You'll have the tensioner body itself, a ribbed idler, the 390 thousandths spacer, as well as the smallest of the 3 spacers that fits an M10 bolt. You're going to have a M10 by 40 That's going to be the bolt that holds the idler to the tensioner. And you're going to have a 60 mil M10 bolt that is actually the bolt used to bolt it to the idler bracket. So let's go ahead and get this put together. You'll start with the 390 thousandths spacer. You'll drop on your ribbed idler. The second spacer will go on there, and you take your 40 mil bolt. You can start that by hand. And since this is going to be facing the bracket and you won't be able to tighten it once it's on the car, let's go ahead and take our 5/16 hex and get this good and tight. Now that we've got this put together, you'll drop in your 60 mil bolt and we'll head to the vehicle to prep and get this installed. All right, so before we install the tensioner itself, we've got to make a slight adjustment to one of the air conditioning hoses. This hose here needs to be bent very gently away from where the tensioner lands. So you'll take it with your hand and move it about an inch to that side. Once you make that adjustment, make sure it rests there out of the way and fine tune it as needed. But that should be enough space right there to be clear of the tensioner once we get it installed. So now it's time to go ahead and install this tensioner, but the first thing we want to do is confirm that the AC line we adjusted is far enough away. So you're going to take this dowel pin and you're going to line it up in the hole that you'll see down here kind of on the bottom left-hand side of your bracket. And what I'm seeing once this is in place is it's still pretty close. So that's why we check. We're going to go ahead and pull this tensioner back out of the way and adjust that AC line just a little bit more. That should be good. So we'll go ahead and take the tensioner and the 60 millimeter M10 bolt, drop it in the tensioner, line the dowel in there. You'll feel the bolt kind of sink into its hole once you've got it aligned, and you'll start that by hand. Once that's started by hand, you'll grab your socket wrench with a 5/16 hex on it. Go ahead and tighten that down. So now we're going to install our trans-solenoid relocation bracket. You have the bracket itself, and you're going to have two M8x20 bolts that bolt it to a location that's on the idler plate, as well as a location on the timing cover. So let's go ahead and get this in place. I start with the bottom bolt because it's a little bit easier to reach. Going first, you'll start that by hand. You get a couple threads in that one. You go to the top one that's on the timing cover and get it in place and get it started by hand. Then you grab a 13 millimeter socket and get it tightened up. You can use a 13 millimeter ratcheting wrench. It might make it a little bit easier in the tight space. If it's difficult to reach it, don't be afraid to pop the wiring harness out of the two grommets here so you can see what you're doing. So now that we've got the bracket in place, we're going to go ahead and place the solenoid in it. We're going to reuse the factory hardware that uses a T20 bolt. So let's get this in place. You'll line the dowels up with the bracket. It'll drop right in, and you'll start your hardware by hand. Once the hardware is started, you can grab your tool. It's a T20. Go ahead and get them in a little bit. And remember there's 4, 2 on each side. So before you tighten them all down, make sure you get all 4 started. Now that we've got them all 4 started, let's go ahead and tighten it down. And now that it's tight, you can go ahead and take your harness and plug it back in. All right, so now we're going to install our smooth idlers on the idler plate here. You have the idler itself as well as a spacer that's stepped, and the hardware, which this is a 1/2 inch by 13 by 1 3/4 inch long bolt. So let's go ahead and drop the idler on the bottom one here. Put the spacer on the hardware. Spin that on. Get that tightened up. And do the same for the top one, and make sure that your C-clip's facing out. And you'll come back and torque these to 30 foot-pounds. So now we're going to start building up our fuel rails for the blower. You'll start by removing the fuel pressure sensor from the factory rails. You'll need a 27 millimeter socket or an adjustable wrench. You break that loose. It should break loose very simply. Once that's off, you can set the rails aside. Beware of a little bit of fuel that's still in the system. The fuel pressure sensor you just removed from the OEM rail is going to go in your driver's side rail. You can identify your driver's side rail by the standoff here with 2 holes, 2 threaded holes. You'll use the one right here on the right that's kind of machined up. You will not use any type of sealant on these threads because it is fuel. Once you get it in, take your wrench, give it a good bit of tightening, but not too much. Just a little bit extra to make sure it's good and tight. You don't want to strip those threads out. Now your fuel pressure sensor is installed. Then you're going to find all your plugs and adapters here. You'll pull those out, as well as in your O-ring bag. Go ahead and source your bag of O-rings for all the fittings that go in the rails here, and we'll move forward into building out these fuel rails. Now we've got the fuel rails laid out with all the specific parts for them. Starting from front to back, this is the driver's side rail and this is the passenger side rail. We've got two 6 ORB plugs, as well as our adapters for the fittings to the feed line, as well as the DI feed line that goes into the side here, and then we've got our crossover fittings in the back. We're going to lubricate the O-rings on each one of these fittings and install them on the rails. Take a little bit of super lube, and on each one of these O-rings you want to make sure it's well lubricated, because that keeps it from binding or tearing upon installation, and will help make sure that that O-ring seals nice and tight for you. So in the end of each one of these rails at the front, you will install the 6 ORB plug, and you use a 6mm hex socket. And I'll go through and tighten all these up with a final tighten. I just want to get them assembled. We're going to do both plugs first. We'll get over here to the fittings on the side. Since the O-ring's off of it, you can kind of go ahead and lubricate that before you even put it on the fitting itself. You scoot that down to where it seats below the threads, and then spin it in. O-ring's well lubricated. Scoot that down past the threads where it seats well, and just thread it by hand in the back. Make sure it goes on smoothly. The O-ring isn't binding. You should be able to look down and not see the O-ring as it sets into the machine work of the rail itself. Here's the fitting for the rail to DI for your direct injection. And these are the adapters that allow the OEM lines to connect to your billet rails. Lubricating our last O-ring. Let's spin that by hand into the fuel rail there. Let's grab the appropriate tools and get everything tightened up. Now use a 3/4 inch socket for all of your line fittings here. You'll need a deep one. Now these don't need to be cranked to like Ugga Dugga. You just need to feel the fitting securely seat, and just a little bit more from that. That one's done. That one's done. That one's done. And that one's done. Again, you don't need to crank these down with Ugga Dugga style torque. You just need to feel the fitting securely seat and compress the O-ring. The same will apply to the 6 ORB plugs on the front. You'll use a 6mm hex. It's good and tight. And get the other side. Now we'll continue with getting the injectors installed. Now we're installing the injectors and lock brackets. We're only going to take one cap off, and this will be the cap with the blue O-ring, so the plug is facing upwards on each one of these. We'll remove the second cap when we get ready to install it in the blower. We're going to take our super lube and lubricate each one of these O-rings before installing it in the rail. Now, don't be shy. Make sure that these are well lubricated. It keeps from binding and damaging the O-rings upon installation. And you'll just gently insert into the fuel rail. Again, you want to make sure your plugs are oriented in the right direction, this being the outboard side of the rail. So we'll just tip it that way. Make it a little easier on ourselves to install these and position the connectors in the right direction. All right, now that the injectors are installed, we're going to take these lock rails, and you'll notice I'm going to pop an injector out and show it to you. Below the O-ring, there's a flat spot, and then there's a thin notch. I've got my thumbnail stuck in there. That's where these lock rails go, and they're designed to pop in and hold the orientation of the injector with the plug facing the correct direction. It is imperative that the injectors face the correct direction and are clocked correctly, otherwise it could cause drivability issues. So let's get these lock rails installed. Go right in that little slot and push down. You'll feel kind of a pop when it does it. Now, if your injector is not oriented correctly to the one that you're trying to click it to, it will not go on. Do not force it. Do not cause harm to the injector. Be very conscious of the position of the injector and rotate lightly until you feel no pressure on the body of the injector and the lock rail seats right in. You're going to do this in pairs for all 8. And again, give the injector a little bit of a wiggle to make sure that that lock rail sits in there real nicely and clicks in without putting any pressure on the injector. Again, I can't express how important it is to give the injector a little bit of a wiggle and make sure that that rail seats nicely without putting pressure on the body of the injector. You just give it a little wiggle to make sure that happens. All right, all of our lock rails are in place. Now with our injectors installed and our fuel rails assembled, we're going to remove the caps, the lower caps on the injectors, get them lubricated, and get these rails installed on the supercharger itself. So here's where you take a bit more super lube. Don't be shy, get these well lubricated. It prevents fuel leaks, bound up or torn injector O-rings. So this is our driver's side rail. So it's going to face this way, as this is the front of the supercharger and this is the driver's side. We're going to very gently set those in there and then gently push down so the O-rings drop into the machined spots for them. Doesn't take a lot of pressure, but as soon as you feel the O-ring go in there, you're going to grab one of your fuel rail bolts and your 5mm Allen, and then get the bolt started to support your rail up on there. So there's 1, and there's 2. Go ahead and tighten these down. Don't take a lot, just till they're good and tight. These will be torqued to 90 inch-pounds, so I'll grab a torque wrench and get that torqued. We've got our torque wrench. We'll go ahead and get these torqued to 90 inch-pounds. There we go. And there we go. Now we'll spin the blower around and do the opposite side. Now we're going to repeat the process for the passenger side rail. We'll remove the caps. Take a bit of super lube. Again, be generous, as you do not want a fuel leak. And if one of these O-rings gets pinched or torn in some way, form, or fashion when you go to install it, I guarantee you will have a fuel leak. And once that's complete, your adapter for the crossover will face the back, your plug will face the front. This is the passenger side of the supercharger with the front facing that direction. You'll line up your injectors with the bungs and gently push down until you feel them drop in and set. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to take our 5mm Allen and start our bolts. We'll grab our torque wrench and torque these to 90 inch-pounds. There's 1 and 2. That completes getting the fuel rails on the blower. Now that the rails are installed, we're going to install the crossover tube. Do note that your 90-degree side will go on the driver's side or left-hand side of the vehicle. You'll just press this on until it clicks. That completes installing the crossover line. Now we're going to install our provided 3-bar map sensor. Take a little bit of super lube and lubricate the O-ring that is here on the map sensor. Take care not to get any of the super lube in the sensor itself. Just make sure that that O-ring is lubricated so it's not a source of a leak. You'll then take the provided 10mm bolt out of the map sensor location and insert your map sensor. Gently press until it sinks on there. Then take your bolt and start it by hand. So that's started. You can just take a box end wrench and tighten it up until it's snug. You do not need to crank this down. You don't want to crush the sensor. There we go, good and tight. Now we're moving back over to the vehicle to complete some of the wiring. First thing up is the jumper harness for your throttle body. You're going to actually use the passenger side throttle body connector and grab this end here, press it firmly into the connector till you hear a pop, and then lock it. This is going to route forward and down. You want it sitting out in front of the hoses here. It'll be plugged into the throttle body once the supercharger is in place. So now you move to the back of the engine and you'll connect up your jumper harness for the map sensor. You'll locate your original map sensor connector and take this end here. Only goes on one way. Squeeze until you feel a firm click, and then relock the connector, and you'll route the harness over to the driver's side to be connected when the blower is installed. Next, you'll locate the 3 supplied caps and you'll cap off all the plugs for the IMRCs. You have 3-pin caps and a 2-pin cap. The 2-pin cap goes to the blue connector here. Your 3-pin cap. And this one, you'll feel it click, lock it, and you've got one more that goes right here. You feel it click, lock it, and then you're going to take these, route them against the harness so they're out of the way, and zip tie them up. I'm going to grab the zip ties and we'll get that part knocked out. I need one more. Route it over here this way. And we'll snip the slack and clean that up. You can also now remove the Christmas tree plugs that are on the back of the harness here, these gray ones. Get my hands out of the way so you can see it. You snip back behind that, be able to pull that right out of the harness. You can go ahead and do that for both of these. Push them forward until you expose the straight zip tie behind it. Clip that, just pull it right on out of the harness. So once all these harnesses are in place, you can kind of roughly route them to where they need to be. For the map sensor, since that's now on the front of the supercharger, you're going to route that through the intake valley underneath there so it can plug up at the front of the supercharger. Your throttle body harness, you're going to lay it up here in front of the hoses so that it can come around and connect there. Once you have your final position with the throttle body plugged in, you could then zip tie this to secure it to keep it out of the belt drive. So in your plug kit, you'll have a 4th additional plug. This will be for your driver's side throttle body connector. You'll push this plug in here until it clicks, hit the lock. Now, the easiest way to tuck this away is to go ahead and cut the tape that has it at the 90-degree angle, or 180-degree in this case. Remove that so it's straight, and then you're going to trace it back into the harness, tuck it underneath this degas line, and zip tie it out of the way. So zip tied, cut the slack. So once you're finished installing the bracket for this automatic transmission fluid solenoid, you're going to have a little jumper harness that you add in here. Just to make sure that you have enough slack here, and you just kind of lay this over out of the way. Now that we've completed all the wiring under the hood, we're going to go ahead and install our gaskets into the bottom of the supercharger. You take your gasket and lightly press it in there, slowly making sure it lines up and sets all the way in the machined groove. You'll repeat this on all 8 intake ports. Little pro tip, it's easiest to line up the dip right here for the injector and then press the rest of it in there. That way you don't have to worry about matching up any of these shapes. Once you've done it that one time, it goes right in. And then we've got the 4 additional to complete. We're going to complete the passenger sides now, again lining up that dip for the injector just to ease the installation. You want to make sure these seat all the way in. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the plug from the back of the supercharger so we can get it full of oil. We've got our plug removed. We can go ahead and pull the sticker out of the way. You're provided 4 ounces of supercharger oil. That should be exactly what it requires to get this thing full. You do have a sight glass in the back of here. Your goal is to get this filled up halfway up the sight glass. So let's go ahead and get this oil in here. Once you've got your oil in, you can go ahead and put your plug back in. Confirm by looking at your sight glass that it's halfway up, which it is in this case. Get your plug hand tight, then grab your tool. Go ahead and tighten that back up. You'll feel it compress the O-ring. Once it stops, just put a little bit more on it. Then, now that your oil's in it, go ahead and spin the blower by hand a little bit just to make sure that the oil and lubricants go ahead and get into the bearings and all the contact surfaces inside the case. Now that we've got the oil in the blower, we can go ahead and install our lid gasket. Start right here at this point. You work your way down. And again, make sure that you actually feel it seat into the groove as you make each turn. And just use your thumbs to kind of work it in. And once you reach the end here, you're going to take a razor blade and make a very clean cut to close the gasket and complete right there. And again, just go around and make sure it's fully seated in the groove all the way around. This will compress down and help seal, but you just want to make sure it's securely in the supercharger. And you got one more piece that goes across the front here. Now we're going to cut in the angle to kind of match here. Let me see, I've got that side matched. I'll get it to sit down off in here. And then I'm going to match that angle again right over here. And I'd rather it be a little bit on the side of tight than to cut it too short. Push it and get it to seat in there. And then go around and check your work and make sure it's fully seated all the way around in the groove. Next up is going to be the black perimeter O-ring. Now, you do not want to stretch this. It is the exact length you need. So as you work it around and you press it into the groove, make sure you're not dragging it along and stretching it. Just press it down into the groove. Worth noting that you should take your time. Again, you do not want to stretch this gasket because it is a one-piece gasket that is not cut. So slowly work around, make sure you're not pulling it or stretching it into place, but that it's resting easily into the groove and you're just pushing it down. If you're referencing the paper instructions that came with your supercharger kit, do note that I'm doing this a bit out of order because it is a bit easier to install these O-rings and gaskets outside of the vehicle so you're not leaning over the vehicle. Little pro tip for watching the video. It should, if you've done it correctly, be an exact fit. Like so. So then trace the perimeter and make sure it's fully seated all the way around the perimeter of the supercharger. You might find that a spot is risen up out of the groove. Just push it back down gently. And that completes the gasket installation. So now we're ready to go ahead and drop the blower in the car. But as a bit of a pro tip, it's actually easier to get to these last 2 bolts here in the back when this hose is not in place. So we're going to pop it back off for the supercharger's installation into the car, and then we'll reinstall it once it's in the car. All right, in preparation for the supercharger to go in, we're going to go ahead and remove the tape we've used to cover the intake ports. We'll use this as an opportunity to inspect for debris one more time before the supercharger goes down. Also, with this map harness, you want to make sure it goes underneath the hose in the rear for the DI. There's a metal hose back there. You want to make sure it's underneath that just so you don't have to worry about crushing it or anything, and make sure it lays dead center here in the valley. Take one last moment, make sure that all your injector plugs and everything's backing out of the way so they don't get pinned when you go to set the supercharger in there. Take a look at your intake ports on the cylinder head, make sure there's no debris or leftover tape or anything you may have forgotten. And then grab yourself a buddy, grab a hold of the supercharger and set it in. Kind of wiggle it around just a little bit to make sure it settles down nice and evenly on the intake ports. Then you can move on to getting it bolted in. Now while you still have that friend handy, you can go ahead and have him tip the blower up and get your plug for your map sensor, get it plugged in and connected, and then set it back down. You want to make sure that wire is not getting pinched anywhere, that the blower settles right back down, and that your map sensor is plugged in. So now we're going to prepare the hardware to bolt the supercharger down. We've got 6 bolts here. These are the M6 by 1 thread pitch, 75mm in length. You're going to apply these O-rings just beneath the head using a little bit of super lube, and then you're going to put some blue Loctite on the threads. I like to spread the Loctite around a little bit in the threads before pitching it in there. Now we'll move over and install these in the supercharger. So these 6 bolts are going to be the 6 bolts inside of the supercharger, 3 on each side by the runner. So we're going to go ahead and place these in here and start these gently by hand. Once you drop them in, you can take an extension in your 10mm socket. And you might need to shift the blower around just a little bit to get them to start. That helps locate the blower. You're going to spin them gently down by hand, as we'll have a torque procedure that we'll cover when we're ready to tighten all these up. Now you've got 4 M6 by 1/0 by 45mm long bolts. There's going to be 2 in the rear and 2 in the front. We're going to go ahead and drop in the rears first. Now they are a challenge. I don't have a good way to show you that angle. I do have a light in the center of the blower, shining light back there, and I'm going to use a magnet to drop this bolt in. This is why we took the fuel line, the crossover off, just to make it a little bit easier to get this bolt into position. So you scoot the harness back, poke the bolt into the bolt hole, take your free hand, put your finger there to block the bolt coming with the magnet. Now it's in place. We're going to use a swivel 10mm to get in there and get on it. And again, this is a bit of a booger, but once you're on it, you can get it spun and started. All right, let's grab the other side. Remind yourself that it's going to be worth it once you feel this car make a hit for the first time with over 700 horsepower. There we go, that one's hand tight. Now we'll do the 2 fronts. These are significantly easier than the others. That one's dropped in, and that one's dropped in. We use the same extension and by hand trick. All right, all of those are in. All right, once you've got everything started, you want to keep them reasonably loose because you've got one more bolt to put in through the idler pulley plate that's in the front of the engine. Because on the front of the supercharger, you've got one more bolt hole. You'll place this bolt in there. It is a M8 bolt, about 60mm in length. You'll rock the blower forward, or however you need to in your particular situation to get it started. Once you get it started, you'll take a 6mm hex and actually thread it in. It will be pretty tight because you're aligning this one bolt with the rest of the 10 that hold the supercharger down to the engine. Once you've got that one in most of the way, you can go ahead and do your torque procedure to torque the supercharger down to the engine. So to torque the supercharger's lower down, you have a very specific torque procedure. We're going to pop up on the screen real quick for each of these 10 bolts. You have to make 2 passes. Your first pass is going to be at 88 inch-pounds. That's 88 inch-pounds. So let's go ahead and make that pass. Starting right here, this is bolt number 1. So that's your 88 inch-pounds. Position 2. Position 3 is right beside it, in the middle. It's position 4. Position 5 is back here. Heading over to position 6. Position 7 is right up here at the front. Position 8 is on the other side of the front. Position 9 is going to be the opposite rear corner. 88 inch-pounds there. Swap over to the other side. It's going to be a bit difficult to reach this one, but once you get it spun down, it's a little bit easier. All right, time for the torque. There's my 88 inch-pounds. Out she comes. Now you do the exact same thing and make a second pass at 106 inch-pounds. Once you've completed the 2 passes on the torque procedure on the supercharger's lower, you can go ahead and tighten that bolt that's in the idler plate. All right, now that the blower is on and torqued down, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the fuel rail crossover tube that we removed earlier for ease of installation. I'm gonna run this through the back and kind of hold it up in place so it lands there. The 45-degree angle will go over here on the passenger side. You'll just push until you feel a click, and you slip around to the other side and run your hand back here. Now your heater hose is gonna make it slightly difficult to get to it. Once you reach back here and grab the line, feel it with your hand, you'll capture it, and then you'll take both hands and a bit of finagling. And there it went. It is on. So now we've moved back to the supercharger lid and we're going to install the internal bypass O-ring. You'll notice inside this bypass port, there's a machined groove and you're going to have this large O-ring. You're going to take this and prep it with some super lube. You want to lubricate it pretty generously all the way around, inside and out, because you're going to install it in this place and it's got to slip over the bypass port. So again, don't be shy with your super lube. By all means, you don't want it like dripping, but you want it well lubricated before you place it in the groove here. So once you have it lubricated, you'll start and you'll work it around the inside of this to get it inside of that groove. And then confirm that all the way around it's installed. And now we'll move to installing the lid on the supercharger. Before installing the lid, we're going to make one more pass of the O-rings and seals to make sure everything is in place and sealed well. It's a whole lot easier to take a look at it right now before we drop on the supercharger lid than it is to find a problem and once the supercharger is together and have to pull it all back apart to fix it. So take your time, make sure the O-ring is fully seated all the way in its groove, then you can grab the supercharger lid and gently set it on. So we're going to take it and very gently slide backwards, let it set in place, feel it kind of find itself on the bypass there, and gently press down. It may take a little bit of negotiation to get it to drop, and there you go. And that's why we lubricate that O-ring. We want that to slip down onto the bypass and seal well. So check around the blower, make sure that the lid has dropped all the way into place at all sides. See, it's a little bit up here in the back. We're gonna lightly adjust that to get it to sit correctly. Once you've confirmed it sat correctly, you can grab your hardware and start to install that. So the supercharger lid is held on by 20 fasteners. You've got 3 that are 70 millimeters in length. They go into this front position here. And as I drop these bolts in place, I'm going to go ahead and get them started. And then the additional 17 are an M6 by 30 mil. So again, that's 70 mil in those 3 positions in the front, and the other 17 are these 30 mil versions, and they'll go around the perimeter. And we're just going to blast through here and start them all a couple threads by hand. Before we do the back, we'll slip around to the other side. The back ones are a little bit tougher to see. We'll knock those out in a moment. You got the 5 across the back. The easiest way to take care of that is to take your hand and find the bolt hole location. Drop the bolt in there. I'm going to grab a magnet to make that just a little bit easier on myself. There's that one in. And one last one. I believe that one is located right there. And that's all the hardware in there. Now we'll go over the torque procedure. So now we'll torque down the lid. We're going to show a diagram on the screen right now of the layout. You do start at the 3rd bolt back from the front on the driver's side. The torque value you will put in is 90 inch-pounds. You just take your time and work your way through all 20 bolts. Little pro tip, you want to get your socket onto this bolt, use a wobble or something of that nature, you can actually slip through this hole in the cowl that you've removed and tighten that bolt on this driver's side rear corner to torque it. It's going to be a little bit fiddly, but you can get there. And that is all 20. Once you've completed your first pass, you want to go back around one more time to confirm that none of these got loose as the O-ring and gaskets inside the lid compressed. So you make one more pass. So now we're going to move over to the belt drive system. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get the Supercharger pulley on the blower. So you grab your pulley out and you'll grab a little bag labeled for Supercharger pulley bolts. They are M6 by 14 millimeters long and use a 5 millimeter Allen. We'll go ahead and get these on here and we're going to tighten them up hand tight. We won't torque these down until the belt's actually on. Next, we'll grab your water pump pulley and the 3 10 millimeter bolts for that. We'll get it started by hand. We'll grab a 10 millimeter wrench. Maybe give them just a little bit of tightness. You're not going to be able to fully torque these until the belt's on, but you do want to make sure that they're tight enough to not have an alignment problem when installing the belt. And there we go. So now we're going to take the belt that's included in your kit and go ahead and get it temporarily routed in place until we can make some adjustments on our adjustable tensioner over on the alternator side. We're going to put a diagram up on the screen because it's pretty tight space here and difficult to see what exactly is going on. But I'll walk you through it. I'll talk through it, how the routing goes. So when you drop the belt down in here, I like to start at the alternator and get it over here around the alternator. And we're going to go on the bottom side first. So around the alternator, over the smooth idler that's now on our adjustable tensioner. Then we're going to dip down around that underneath the crank on the harmonic balancer there. Once it's down around the harmonic balancer, you'll slip it behind the ribbed idler on the new tensioner. You may have to loosen that bolt to get around and get it on there, which is fine. We'll grab the hex socket bit to break that loose, to slip that in place. We'll loosen that tensioner real quick to make that part happen. And again, we're going to loosen that up just enough to slip the belt around behind it. Once we've got it back behind there, we can tighten that tensioner back down. Now we're going to do the top side of the belt. So you come from the alternator, underneath the smooth idler that's above your adjustable tensioner, up over the water pump pulley, and down here by the crank pulley. You're going to see on the diagram that you got to come up and have the belt sandwiched between your two smooth idlers. Once you're in that position, confirm that your belt's riding correctly in all the ribs of the ribbed locations. That would be your alternator, your crank pulley, and your new tensioner on the passenger side. You should have the belt just come up and barely peek between the two ribbed idlers that are on the idler plate. You can leave it resting there between those two idlers until you're ready to actuate your tensioner and take up the slack to get it on the supercharger pulley. Now that we've got the belt loosely routed but not on the supercharger pulley yet, I'm going to go through a couple things to try to make this job as easy as possible, because you need to make the adjustments on your adjustable idler that's in the position of the original OEM tensioner. So that idler is right here, this bolt here. You're going to want to set that to full loose, and then you can go ahead and get your belt onto your supercharger pulley. So with that adjustable idler at full loose, I'm going to go ahead and actuate the tensioner with one hand. And we're going to pull the belt up and around onto the supercharger pulley. It's going to take a little bit of work. You may even need to slide it off one of the smooth idlers in the idler plate and then work it back around and on. And it will like to move around, so just be prepared to make slight adjustments to what you're working on to get it in place, because you don't want it to jump a rib on any of the idlers or tensioners or anything of that nature. All right, so now that we've got it lightly routed in place, we've got it up over the supercharger pulley, but it's off the alternator. We've got the adjustable idler set to full loose. We're going to grab a friend and have them pull on the tensioner so we can get it routed into its last place. Once you kind of have it loosely in place, trace all your pulley locations and make sure the belt's properly aligned on the smooth idlers and all your ribbed locations, like your water pump. And again, we have the diagram up on the screen for you to check out the exact routing. Once it's in place, you can release the tension on the tensioner. And now it's time to go ahead and adjust your adjustable idler. We need to make some fine adjustments on our belt drive system here, and that's the whole purpose of the presence of an adjustable idler. So if you look right here on camera, you're going to see markings on your tensioner with a series of numbers ranging from below 100 to above 100. Your goal when adjusting your adjustable idler is to have your tensioner rest at the 100 marker there. That puts your travel at about 80 to 85%. That way, under wide open throttle, when your belt stretches, you have plenty of travel left in that tensioner. So keep your buddy handy, have him actuate the tensioner to take the tension off the belt. You're then going to make small adjustments on the auxiliary idler up to slowly work towards getting your tensioner to rest at that 100 marker. So this is our first check where I've moved it up a little bit and I'm tightening it up. Now I've got it reasonably tight. He's going to release tension on the tensioner.
Got a little bit more to go.
Got a little bit more to go. We're at 110. We're going to take a little bit more of that tensioner out. So he's going to tension the belt, and then I'm going to re-loosen my idler just a little bit and continue to slide it up. And I'm going to tighten that back up, and he's going to check.
Right on it.
So now we're dead on with the arrow pointing at 100. I'm going to get the adjustable idler to a final torque. And now we've got our belt system adjusted. Just want to give you a quick look at what that looks like once it's in place. You'll see that the arrow is pointing right at 100. Now that our belt's in place, we're going to take a moment and go around and connect the various injectors and sensors on the fuel system just to get that part out of the way. You'll feel a solid click each time a plug seats. On your fuel rail pressure sensor, you'll slide that on there until it clicks and then slide the lock in place. Again, you should feel a pretty solid click every time one of these plugs seats. And if you've done it right and got your injector locks in place, they should be oriented to where it's very simple and easy to get to the plug itself. You just Slide it down on there. If you're not sure, pull it back off and then install it again to make sure it clicks good and solid for you. And while you're over here, you can go ahead and grab your fuel feed. You can put that in place. It'll click good and securely there. Slip around to the other side. Same process on the passenger side. You're going to locate all 4 of your injector plugs. Make sure they're roughly aligned with your injectors and then drop them down into place. Again, you can eyeball your orientation of your injectors. They should be correct since you put on your injector locks when you install the rails. Just feel for a good solid click each time you drop one of these down there. And you can go ahead and hook up your DI feed. Should slip right on there, and then you put your lock back in place. Check and make sure it's still tight and in place. That completes hooking up your injectors and your fuel rail sensors. So now we're going to prepare our intercooler inlet and outlet tubes for installation to the lid. You're going to have 4 O-rings, 2 retention plates, 2 M6 bolts that use a 5mm hex socket to install, and the tubes themselves. So what you do is you take some super lube. You're going to lubricate these O-rings to prevent tearing or pinching or ripping as you go to install them. So lubricate these well, don't be shy. They need to be well lubricated so they don't tear. And you'll work them onto the tube. And once your O-rings are installed, you move over to the car and get these installed in the lid. So now you take your inlet and outlet tubes with lubricated O-rings and you'll slide them into the head unit right here into the lid. You're going to notice a pretty thick notch. That notch is for your retention plate. So you take that retention plate and drop it right down into that notch. And then you'll take your M6 bolt and you'll start that by hand. Once that's started, you can grab a socket wrench and your 5mm hex socket and go ahead and tighten that down. You should feel just a little bit of play. The properly lubricated O-ring will help seal this so you don't have any leaks. Then you move over to the other side. Now you repeat that exact same process. You insert each tube. Making sure that notch is exposed so your retention plate will slot right in. You'll take your bolt and start it by hand. And grab your socket wrench with your 5mm Allen and go ahead and tighten that down. These don't need to be super tight. You don't want to crank them way down. It's going into aluminum and it's a small bolt, no more than about 10 or 12 foot-pounds. Good and hand tight. Now we're going to install the quick connect provision for your evap system. That goes on the driver's side of the supercharger. You'll see the threaded hole here. You'll have 2 fittings that are 6 ORB. One's going to be for the PCV on the passenger side, and this one's going to be for the evap. It is the smaller of the 2. So you take a number 906 O-ring, you lubricate it with some super lube. You use that super lube to lubricate your O-ring, and then slide it onto the threaded side of the fitting. Once that's on there, you can start this by hand in the side of the supercharger. Then you'll use a 11/16 socket to tighten it up. Use a deep socket, of course. And this doesn't need to be super tight. You just need to feel it cinch down and compress the O-ring. Because of the lubrication in the O-ring, that'll prevent tearing or pinching. Now that's installed. Next up, we're going to mount your evap purge valves bracket and modify the line. Your bracket's going to mount right here on the 2 threaded holes on the side of the lid. You've got 2 10mm M6 bolts, as well as this bracket that's in your hardware bag. And you get these up here and get them started by hand to get the bracket mounted. There's the first one started and the second one in and get it started. Once those are on there, you will torque those down to 80 inch-pounds. It'll be a 10mm socket. It's 80 inch-pounds there. So now we're going to modify the existing line off of the evap purge solenoid. You'll take a razor blade and very gently cut to split that line off. You don't want to dig in super deep because you don't want to tear up the barb side of it. But you just want to split it enough to get it off. Once you've made your cut, you should be able to lightly pry and pull her off. Included in your kit, you will find a 5.5 inch long line with a worm gear clamp. It's already got a quick connect fitting on it. So you'll pull that line out of the bag. I'll bring it over to the camera in just a moment. You'll grab the included 5.5 inch line with quick connector and hose clamp out of your kit contents, and that'll replace the line that you trimmed and removed here. You go ahead and slip that onto your purge valve. If you want it to sit all the way flush against the valve, take a 1/4 inch socket and tighten down that hose clamp just a little bit. Then the bracket you installed on the lid, you'll slide your purge valve down on that. You want to make sure it slots in appropriately. You'll see the rubber slot there. There we go. Should go on pretty easy. And then rotate your quick connector over to the fitting you installed, and that'll complete that. You can then verify your hose clamp is good and tight. That completes the modification of the evap purge valve. Now we're going to install the provision on the passenger side of the Supercharger's inlet that allows you to connect your PCV system from the passenger side valve cover. That includes this quick connect fitting. This is the larger of the two, at just a hair over 15 millimeter. To install this, we're going to need to use a 906 O-ring. It comes in a package of two. One will be for your evap side and one will be for the PCV. So we're going to take this O-ring and grab a little bit of super lube, lubricate it well so it has a good seal and doesn't tear as we install it. A little bit of super lube on a fingertip, work it around the O-ring, and work it onto the fitting itself. So we'll start this by hand, feeling for the O-ring to start the seat. Once you've got that started, you'll grab a 7/8 inch socket and a ratchet, and you go ahead and tighten that down. You want to feel it just snug up and compress that O-ring. It doesn't have to be crazy tight. Once that's installed, you can grab the 9-inch PCV hose. It's got a 90 on one end and a 45 on the other. The 90-degree end will go on your passenger side valve cover. Connect the quick connect there, and you'll take the 45-degree end and push it onto the fitting you just installed. So now we're going to prepare the low temp radiator, also known as a heat exchanger, for installation into the car. On each one of these mounts, there's going to be 4, 2 on each side. You're going to take these rubber grommets and you're going to install these. And then you're going to take 2 of the inserts, also known as spuds, and insert them into the grommet. If it seems a bit tight, you can use a little bit of super lube to get them to slide in. They should fit pretty well and pretty snug. I'm going to flip the heat exchanger around and get the other side. And again, take your insert or spud, push it down into the grommet. And these can be a little bit tight. Just work it in there. Like I said, if you need to use a little bit of super lube or something of that nature, it won't hurt it. So I'm going to pop you off the tripod for just a second to show you the next part of what we're doing. You're going to be installing these standoffs, also known as transfer hex screws, on the back side of the bolts that go into the bumper support on both the driver and passenger side. It'll be the bolts that go through the holes here. So what you have to do is, you notice there's a harness right here. On that harness, it has a little clip that slid on there. You'll have to pop that off, and that'll give you access to those threads. What those threads look like, I'm going to point you through here. Those threads stick out right back there. I'll pop that harness clip off of there and show it to you a little better. Now that the harness clip is off there, you can see the 2 studs sticking through. Those would be where you spin these transfer nuts on each side. So you get them started by hand. On each one of these. Once they're started by hand, you grab a 16 millimeter wrench and use that to tighten them the rest of the way down. They do need to be tightened all the way. I'm gonna use a ratcheting wrench here just to make this a little bit easier on myself. That's one. Now we're on the second one. We'll move over to the passenger side. We'll do the same on the passenger side. Now again, both of these have harnesses that are clipped on there. A quick and easy way to get that harness clip off is to use a box end wrench and just kind of gently push. It'll pop that clip off of there. And then you'll be able to spin on these hex transfer screws. It can be a little bit tight because of the paint that's on them, but it'll spin right through them. Just make sure they start by hand so you're not cross-threading anything. So that's the top one started, and that's the bottom one. Again, I'm going to use the ratcheting wrench. That one's in the top. Let's get the bottom one done. It's pretty easy to access from the bottom side of the push bar. All right, make sure they're both good and tight. Now we're going to install the brackets on the heat exchanger that mount to the bolts we just installed inside the vehicle on the bumper support. So orientation is very, very important. I'm going to zoom this out for just a second. So this is the driver's side, as identified by the pipe being on the bottom side and the brackets facing forward. So this part faces the vehicle. What's facing down towards the floor faces the front of the car. This being the driver's side, you want the bracket that the threaded portions are lifted up. The holes for bolts to pass through with no threads push forward towards the front of the car, and the bend bends those towards the front of the car. You're going to use 2 of these 30 mil long flat-headed bolts that are a 5 mil Allen. This will be what you use to connect the bracket here. The passenger side will be an absolute mirror of what I just showed you in regards to orientation on the driver's side. So we're going to get these in, get them started and tightened up, and then we'll install the passenger side. Those are good and tight. Let's get the passenger side on here. Flip the heat exchanger around. This is going to change your orientation a little bit, so we need to be mindful of how this lays out. So this is the top, and the passenger side is identified by the top of the heat exchanger having the pipe coming out of it to go back to the supercharger. So your bracket orientation is going to be the same but mirrored on the other side. Your 2 threaded inserts are going to face up. You'll notice the bend in the bracket puts the regular holes pushed forward, and you want them shifted down. You'll take 2 more of the 30 mil flat-headed bolts that use a 5 mil Allen. Drop those in and start them by hand. And then use your socket and ratchet to tighten them up. All right, let's get this assembly over to the car. I popped the camera off the tripod for just a quick second to show you the orientation as it sits in the car. So you'll notice the brackets on both sides face forward with the holes low from the threaded inserts where they're bolted into the heat exchanger. On your passenger side, your outlet's going to be on the top, and on the driver's side, you can see that little yellow cap. Your inlet is going to be on the bottom. So let's go ahead and shift this from the bottom up into the front of the car, and then we'll use 4 M8 bolts that are included in your hardware pack to get this bolted in. So starting at the bottom at the front of the vehicle, you verify that the outlet of the heat exchanger is at the top on the passenger side, and at the inlet is on the bottom on the driver's side. Then you'll insert it up behind the crash support. And once you're up there, you'll align your brackets with the standoffs that you previously installed, and you'll take that M8 hardware and get it started by hand. Once it's started by hand, you can then go ahead and tighten it up. Now we're going to install the degas bottle. You'll start by removing this studded bolt, and once this is out, you'll install your bracket with the provided 10mm hardware. Once the bracket's installed, you'll then take the bottle and 2 additional pieces of 10mm hardware and get that started on the other side of the bracket. You'll want to leave this hardware loose until you get the bracket and everything assembled. That way you can adjust its position to make sure it clears the valve cover or any other components in this area. Once it's clear, you can go ahead and tighten it down. Now that the reservoir is in the car, we're going to go ahead and construct our pump assembly. You have this hanger to mount the pump in. You've got the bracket itself to mount it to the frame rail. And you're going to use an M8 that's 16mm long and 2 M6s that are 10mm long to put this all together. So let's go ahead and get this going. On this bracket, band clamp, let me say it correctly. On this band clamp, this is an 11mm nut. You'll open it up, place it around the pump, slide the bolt into place. I will tell you, little cheat code, you're going to want a little bit of that angle, once this is mounted, to aim that outlet towards the heat exchanger. Once you get it in that position, spin that back on and grab your 11. You'll tighten that band clamp up. Get it decently tight. Then you're going to mount that assembly over onto your bracket. That uses the 10 mil long M6 bolts. You line those up into the threaded holes on the bracket. You get a couple threads in. You'll do this on each side. Be a little bit fiddly to get them started just because you've tightened up this band clamp. What works best on here is actually a 10 millimeter box end wrench. You get both these good and tight. That completes the assembly of the bracket and pump setup. So let's go back to the car. We'll go from the top side and hang this down on the frame rail. So this is the orientation that this mounts into the car. On the bracket, you're going to notice on the back side, there's a dowel on the bracket, and then there's the hole where your hardware will go through. And I'm going to show you those positions on the frame rail itself. Now we're currently looking down at the frame rail. You've got a big open hole here. The second hole is where the dowel on the back of that bracket goes. And then there's a third hole located approximately right here where you'll thread in that M8 bolt. So let's go ahead and hang this pump. Due to the tough angle, I'm going to hand hold the camera and show it to you. But there's the pump location, and on those 3 holes I showed you, the middle one being the dowel and the last one being the threaded hole. That's how the pump's mounted up right there. Now we're going to go ahead and get that tight with a 13 mil socket. You should be able to just reach down here with a deep socket, grab a hold of that 13 mil bolt, and get her tightened up. And there we go. So now we're about to run the hoses for our air to water intercooling system. But first we need to make some cuts right here around the inlet and on the other side for the outlet of the heat exchanger so that the hose can clear. So we're going to take a razor blade and very lightly kind of score our way around to make a very nice clean trim. You can also use something like a body saw or a set of 10 snips to get a clean cut here. The biggest thing you want to do is clear enough space. I should be able to break that off now. There we go. Make enough space for the hose to come through and you to have your constant tension clamp here. Now let's get to the other side. Now we're going to go ahead and do the heat exchanger outlet, the clearance for hose fitment here. Now this is all rubberized, so it's a little bit easier to cut. We're just going to take a razor blade, make a straight cut in, and a little bit lower here, and do the same. Now we've got that in place. We'll cut straight down. And that should be good to clear around there. All right, now that we've made clearance for hoses to go onto the heat exchanger and pump, we're going to start installing our hoses. The first hose that we're going to install is the hose that goes from the pump's outlet to the inlet of the heat exchanger, or low temp radiator, LTR, as you might see in the instructions. This hose is part number 3103407. So go ahead and slide your clamps on there. You've got 16 provided clamps, and we're going to go ahead and get this in place. So first I'm going to scoot it up here and slip it onto the pump itself, and then I'm going to scoot under here and get it onto the heat exchanger. And we'll make sure both ends are fully seated onto their respective spots. Now these hoses are pre-molded and shaped specifically for their locations. We'll tighten this one up at the pump as soon as we get the car back down on the ground, but we'll go ahead and tighten this side right here at the heat exchanger. Get that good and tight. The next hose you're going to install is going to be on the outlet of the heat exchanger. The part number is 3103409. This is the hose in question. You'll take the bin that has kind of a 90-degree angle and it'll go to the heat exchanger, and then you're going to take this hose and make it route flat with the frame rail. So we'll get it over here on the heat exchanger and then have it run where it's aligned with the frame rail there, and then we can do the next piece once we get the car back towards the ground. We're going to go ahead and tighten that clamp up. One clamp on this end at the heat exchanger. Get that one good and tight. The next piece we're going to install is the offset Y. Now you see the hose located right here. Now this shot's a little bit blown out, but it's the only way to get it bright enough for you to be able to see what's going on here. So we're going to take our clamp, get it on the hose, then we're going to slide our Y into place. We'll slide the clamp up and into place to then be tightened up. Some of these clamps could be used to be loosened up before you slide them into place, just to make life a little bit easier. There we go. Helps a little bit. And get it over the knob of the hose. All right. That finishes the hose ending in 409. You now have it going from the outlet of the heat exchanger into the engine bay to an offset Y, and all that's tightened up. Also, while we're under the hood, we went ahead and tightened up the clamp at the top of the pump. All right, on to the next. All right, now that the offset Y is in place down here by the frame rail, we're going to grab hose part number 3103408, and from the straight side of the offset Y, we're going to take the straight side of the hose here and connect that up, and then route up to the rear port on the passenger side of the supercharger. That'll be the inlet to the intercooler core. You'll want to have your clamps pre-installed on the hose, of course. You slide those into place. You have to loosen it just a little bit and put it in place. Let's tighten the top side there, and then down here on the offset Y, we'll slide our clamp into place there. And you'll route that down alongside the frame rail, away from the belt drive system or any sources of heat. You'll want that hose to come straight off of the inlet side, straight out, down, and then trace along the frame rail there, just to make sure you have clearance for everything else around it. Just to give you a second angle to see how that hose comes straight out of the inlet side of the passenger side intercooler, down, takes a turn at the BCM, goes straight down, runs along the frame rail to the offset Y down here. Once it's in place and routed, you can go ahead and tighten those clamps up. All right, so the next hose we're going to install that it connects to that offset Y is hose part number 3103410. It is a longer hose that runs from the offset Y all the way to the driver's side of the supercharger to go to the rear plastic tube to be the inlet for the driver's side intercooler core. You're going to run this down in front of all the radiator hoses as close as you possibly can to the radiator fan to keep it out of the belt drive. So let's go ahead and get this hose routed. And you're going to put two of your worm gear clamps, one down here on the bottom side and one on the top side. That way they're already in place and you can go ahead and slide these onto their respective fittings. Again, you'll run it down and low away from the belt drive to the Y here, and then you'll work it onto the offset portion of the Y that comes from the heat exchanger. Once that's worked into place, you can slide your clamp over. We're not going to tighten it yet in case we have to adjust the hose as we go up over here onto the driver's side inlet. Again, you're going to run that low in front, like low in front of all the hoses down here and as close as possible to the radiator fan itself. Then it's going to come up and go onto the rearward inlet to be the inlet into the intercooler core and the lid. Once it's in place, you can slide that clamp up and over. We're going to check and make sure we like our routing, if we need to twist the hose on the inlets a little bit to get it aligned the way we want it. And then you can tighten your clamp. It's tightened there. Now we're going to tighten it over here at the offset Y. And once that hose is in place, we're going to grab a couple of zip ties, and I'll show you where I'm going to connect this up just to make sure it stays in place and doesn't get into the belt drive. So I mentioned we're going to zip tie this thing up in a way, and you'll notice it's kind of loosely hangs here. We're actually going to use a little bit of the framework on the fan here. You can zip tie this thing forward and away without getting it into the fan itself, and you don't want to crank it down because you don't want to pinch the hose. But we're just going to reach around little piece of the cage that's built around that cooling fan. Grab a hold of that hose and just kind of give it some security here. Kind of pull it into place. That way we can ensure that it stays out of the belt drive and doesn't cause any problems there. You then take your side cutters and trim the slack. We'll do one on this side and we're going to do one on the other side, the passenger side as well. Once that zip tie is in place, take your side cutters and trim the slack. Again, I want to notate it one more time. You don't want to crank these zip ties down. You're not trying to pinch the hose. You just want to secure the hose away from the belt drive. So the next part number we're going to install is part number 3103405. This is going to run from the outlet of the degas bottle down to the inlet of the intercooler pump. So we'll start up here at the degas bottle and we're going to run it down and underneath. I don't have a clamp on this side yet. I'll put that on once we get down to the pump. I've already got my clamp started up here. This U-turn is going to go up here on the top side and slide onto the pump here. I'll put my clamp in place, but I'm not going to tighten it yet. Then I'll swing you down to the intercooler pump so you can see me putting that side on. So the other end of part number 310405 is going to point down here at the intercooler pump. You get your clamp on in place and point it straight down. It will go, let me move that cooling system hose out of the way. It will go down and over the lower radiator hose and then directly straight down onto the pump. These hoses are molded and cut to fit, so just kind of make adjustments to your fit, move your bottle as needed, and you'll get right down there on the pump. And once that's in place, you can tighten your hose clamps. That's the top one. I'll slip down here to the intercooler pump and get it tightened as well. All right, we've got both those tightened, so we'll move on to the next hose. All right, so the next hose that we've got to put together is going to come from the outlet of the driver's side intercooler core down to the degas bottle. This is an assembly. It's got two small hoses and a T that goes in it. We're going to roughly assemble this, not tightening the clamps, just getting them in place so they're ready when we're ready to tighten it down, so we can then move it to the car and make sure we've got our fitment right. So that starts with part number 3103406. That's this hose, the top hose here. We use our straight T that's included in the clamps and hose tees bag. And then we have part number 3103158. This will be the small angle that turns and goes directly into the bottle. So to do this, you'll place your T facing forward, right? Let's imagine the intercooler core, like this is the front of the supercharger heading back. This goes down 45-degree angle down towards the valve cover. This hose is going to face backwards to enter into the degas bottle, right? And then we're going to slide our clamps into place. We'll loosen them up so they'll go around the length of hose, and we'll put our clamps in a place that is convenient to be able to tighten up. So we'll scoot this hose clamp down here. We've got another one that's going to go up here at the top side. And on this hose down here, we're going to gotta loosen it up a little bit to get it to slide the way we want it to. Slide that around that way. And then this one, we're gonna have it hang down here on the bottom. All right, so let's take this assembly and move to the car, and we'll make whatever adjustments we need to make it line up correctly. All right, now that we're over here at the vehicle, we're gonna take our assembly and start with a 45-degree bent hose and get it up into place on the intercooler core outlet. We'll make sure our 90 is good and tight on the T there, and we'll put it in place on the bottle there. And we've pretty much landed our angles here, so we're just going to slide our hose clamps into place. And what I'm seeing here is I'm going to want to turn that T down just a little bit, because we want this hose to stay tight and kind of flush here with this hose and just kind of slip up here to this, so we have this really nice and neat arrangement of hoses. It doesn't look like spaghetti. They look kind of like they were planned to go into place. So you want to I'm going to leave this loose while we route the next hose, just to be sure that I can move this around as necessary. But we can go ahead and tighten up the fittings and clamps that are up here, one at the intercooler core outlet and then at the bottle. Let's go ahead and get these tightened up. Now I like to kind of tuck away these clamps so you don't see a a whole bunch of clamps just sticking out. And we'll do that by kind of positioning the bolt head on the bottom side. They don't have to be super tight either. And we'll get the one over here at the bottle as well. All right, let's grab the next hose. All right, so the final hose we need to run is going to be part number 3103411. This hose is the long hose for the outlet of the passenger side intercooler core that's going to cross the front of the engine and come up to the T that we just installed. So this one needs to be run similarly to the last crossover hose we ran, where it goes down in front of the engine. You want to get it in front of the hoses up close to the radiator fan, and we're going to secure that with a couple of zip ties once we have it in place. So let's go ahead and drop the driver's side of the routing, the part that goes up to the T. We're going to drop that down in the passenger side and begin to route this hose down across the front of the engine. Being that this is an automatic car, there is a few extra hoses in here. You want to be mindful of those hoses that are for your automatic transmission fluid solenoid. So down below that, across the front, you're going to have kind of a clear area right beneath the other crossover hose that you routed. So we're going to go down and around there. Once you kind of have it roughly in place, you want to make sure that your clamps are on the ends here. We're going to start here at the outlet of the passenger side intercooler core. We'll slip this one on. We'll put the clamp in place. We're not going to tighten it yet. I'm going to lightly push that hose back into routing. Again, you want to be mindful of how neat your routing is. You want these hoses to line up and kind of route together, just so you don't look like you put spaghetti under your hood. You want this nice and clean. Once you get that in place, grab your slack from where you routed it across. Make sure that you're clearing everything like you need to. And then we're going to grab our other clamp and slip it on this hose and slip it up into place onto this T. Now before you tighten anything down, have a look at how your hoses are routed. Again, make sure they're nice and neat. You know, these two hoses coming out of the driver's side intercooler core are routed together. These two hoses that are coming out of the passenger side intercooler core, these are routed together, so they're nice and neat. Have a look down here by the fan shroud. Make sure that it's not coming into contact or tangling up with any of your other lines. You don't want any conflicts. You don't want it anywhere near the belt drive. Now that we've confirmed all that, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the clamps that are on the previous assembly here by the T. We'll tighten these clamps up. We'll tighten up the clamps on this last hose, and then we'll be done with our hose system. So let's go ahead and get all these tightened up. Again, I'm trying to match the angle I have on this clamp here by facing the bolt down. Call it OCD, but symmetry does look better under the hood here. So if you match these up, it's the little things, right? So we've got it routed across here. Again, I'm confirming I have no places where it's coming into contact or going to be a problem in the future when the car is running. I've already noticed a little bit of a problem. That problem is like the side that I have my clamp bolt on is going to come in conflict with this one, so I'm going to move it to the inside. I'm going to tighten up this clamp first. I'm going to put it on the bottom side to match the nearest clamp that's on the same hose. So that one's good and tight. We'll run this one up into place. And you want to make sure that all these clamps are positioned in a way that they're serviceable later in case you need to. And we've got one last clamp to tighten up. We're going to slide this one up into place. And again, make sure it faces a way that it's serviceable. It looks clean. I like to put this hardware kind of on the downside so it's not, you know, the first thing you notice when you look under the hood. Don't be afraid to loosen and retighten, kind of adjust the positions of your clamps just to make sure you're not creating any conflicts and it looks the way you want it to when you're done. All right, we got that good and tight. The last thing we're going to do is grab a couple of zip ties and secure that hose away from the belt drive. Again, I'm just using the cooling fan framework here. As long as you can be sure that it's not going to come into contact with the fan blades, it's perfectly fine to use this structure down here as a way to secure the hoses. And again, don't crank these down super tight. You're not trying to pinch the hose off with how tight the zip ties are. You just want to have something to hold it in place so it stays out of the belt drive. Take your side cutters and cut off any slack in the zip ties that you use. We've got one on the driver's side. We're going to put one more over here on the passenger side just to be sure. All right, and once that one's in place, take your side cutters and go ahead and trim that slack. All right, so let's add our reservoir vent hose. That's part number 3103098. It's going to route from your degas bottle, and we're going to zip tie it in a couple of strategic positions to route it down into your under tray. Let's get this in place. So in that bag this hose came in, you're going to find a hose clamp that uses a 1/4 inch bit to tighten it up, and then the 90-degree end on a straight hose. This hose is going to route down by your intercooler pump, and you'll put the 90 up here on the bottle itself. Once that's in place, you're going to grab a couple of zip ties, and you're going to kind of trace its routing down to keep it nice and clean. So I like to route it down here alongside the feed line for the intercooler pump. Again, none of these zip ties should be cranked like super tight, because you're not trying to pinch off a hose. You just want to hold this hose in its position. You get one up there, you get the slack of the hose pointed down into where the engine's under tray would be, and then you're going to put one more zip tie down there just above the pump's inlet. Once your zip ties are in place, you can go ahead and use a set of side cutters and trim the slack. Now once you have your hose routed, you go ahead and slip your clamp up into place. You may have to loosen it up just a little bit to get it started and over that barb, but once it's in place, you go ahead and crank that down. All right, now we're going to move on to wiring in our intercooler pump wiring harness. We're going to start over here at the BCM fuse block under hood. We're going to pop the power side cap over and off. We're going to grab each of these lock tabs, and we're going to go ahead and take this lid off to gain access to the fuse box. Now you're going to note that in your harness, you're going to have your relay here, and then from the relay, each portion is going to branch out with your ground, your trigger wire, your power source and fuse, and then the relay itself. Now currently our air box is out, but the way that we're going to set this up is that once the air box goes back in, the hardware that holds the air box in place is going to be where this tab bolts down. We'll take care of connecting it there once the air box goes in. But we need to go ahead and make our connections for the ground, power source, and trigger. Your ground is actually going to reach up here to this stud that's on the strut tower. So we're going to route underneath here. And get this ground up here in place. Once that ground's up here in place, we're going to take a 8mm socket, and we're going to disconnect the ground from the strut tower and connect that ground wire there. Just drop it right on top. Thread that bolt back in. Now your power wire is going to connect to the 10mm bolt that is main power source to the BCM, so let's grab a 10mm socket. Pop that off. I'm going to route this up here to stack underneath that bolt. And reconnect that. And last but not least, we've got our orange trigger wire here. Now we've got to make some adjustments to the fuse box lid itself, and we also need to take back the sheathing off of here to make sure that it clears. You're going to be looking for fuse F21, and we'll identify that here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and make the modifications we need to make so that your orange wire fits into the fuse box without issue. So here at the fuse box, you want to identify and locate fuse F21. That happens to be this 10-amp fuse that's right here on the 3rd row. So if this is the front of the vehicle, up this side is the front of the vehicle, you've got your 3 rows. The top fuse on this row is a 10-amp fuse, that's F21. We're going to pull that up and out. Now you want to take this fuse, and on your fuse tap here, you've got 2 locations. One has our 5-amp fuse in it. You're going to put the 10-amp fuse in the 2nd location. It needs to be the one closest to the actual fuse location in our tap. So you're going to press that in to install it. Once that's installed, you can set your tap location and press that in. Now one of the things we're going to need to do is actually pull back this sleeve a little bit. So we're going to split the tape that's holding it on right here at the base. We'll split that tape and actually peel back our shielding. So this wire needs to come down and around and gap out right here. So you're going to need to take your side cutters or a trimmer or a razor blade and actually make a small modification to this corner. It's really easy to do. with a set of side cutters. You cut out that little piece there, just a gap big enough for the wire to scooch out. To send the wire over here. Now what I find is if I take our shielding, just to keep this nice and clean, and I'm gonna measure it to length, eyeball it out, get it where it's in place. I'm sorry if the bill of my hat's been in the way. I'll scoot that back a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. We'll run that back in the shielding here, up to the point of right here at that, kind of eyeball that, and we're gonna go ahead and make a cut to the shielding here just to keep that super, super clean. Get that in place. Now our wire slips cleanly out of there and runs through this power section here, where it'll have a cap that covers it. So once all that's in place, you can go ahead and get your cap for the fuse box cover and test fit that. You may have to actually make a notch in your fuse box cover as well, but you'll see this as you test fit your cap, see how it won't go back on cleanly. So you're going to take your cover and you're going to make a little notch here in the cover as well. That notch will look like so. That way that wire has a place to live and it's not bound up or anything of that nature. Just kind of route it up into that place. Once you can get this all to securely clip back down, you'll note that you can actually put your power back in place and all that'll tuck away. Now we're not done. Just wanted to show you that part, how we can cleanly get that put back together. Now let's work on the routing and get all this cleaned up. So what I've done is taken the actual fuse and relay. You'll notice they're tucked very neatly behind this plastic panel. When we go to reinstall this air box on the passenger side, we'll use this hardware here to actually connect that relay to, so it's bolted down and secure. But aside from that, you'll zip tie up and kind of tuck your harness, the slack here. There shouldn't be too much slack, but you want to bundle it up nice and neat so it stays out of potential harm with moving parts around the engine and things of that nature. You'll bundle it up, you'll tuck it back here. Now let's go ahead and get the wire that runs to the pump itself routed. So what you'll do with this line that goes to your pump is right here where the two intercooler hoses come up. You're going to tuck it behind them and pilot it down to the bottom of the car, out by the K-member. That way you've got them held away from the belt drive by the hose systems here. And then we're going to put the car in the air and actually complete the routing over to the pump. And we'll show you where to secure this line so it stays out of the way and out of harm as we finish up the routing. And just to give you another angle of what's going on here, this line coming out of that relay is running down here along parallel to the hose itself that's going up to the intercooler core, down behind them and straight down to the K-member there. Let's get the car in the air and I'll show you the rest of the routing. All right, so now that we're underneath the vehicle, you're gonna have your line routed down here. Again, it comes down behind the intercooler hoses here, and then you're gonna have two spots on the K-member that you can secure this with a zip tie. So we're gonna go to the first one here. Gonna run it nice and neat through here. Run your zip tie through there. And then you're gonna have one more position here that's gonna hold that nice and secure. We're gonna point it up through that zip tie because we're then gonna wrap the slack very nice and neat once we get it plugged in to tuck all this stuff away. But now you have it secure to the K-member here. Now that you've got your two positions located here on the K-member, you're gonna find one more up here. On your hose, your AC hose that comes through here, you can actually place one more zip tie there to secure the line and keep it from moving. So wrap your zip tie up around that. You get that one in place, so now you have 3 points where it's secured there. Now let's bundle up our slack and get it plugged into the intercooler pump. All right, now that we're over here at the pump, you can see it right here. You're gonna take your plug and run it up to it and go ahead and get that plugged in. You feel a good solid click there. You're gonna give your slack one twist and then zip tie that secure. Just to keep it from flopping around. And that way, in case you ever do any modifications that relocate your pump or anything of that nature, you'll have some slack to be able to move that around. All right, let's get our zip ties trimmed and we can move on. So now that we've completed our air to water intercooler system, all the hoses are in place, the wiring's run for the pump, we're actually going to go ahead and close our engine cooling system as well. So we've had 2 heater hoses that we've tucked away to the side here. One on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. We're going to go ahead and grab the passenger side one. It's going to go down here to this heater hose port. This is a quick connect fitting, so this should just slip down on there and clip in. You just want to make sure that the clip's aligned with your connector, and then push until it seats, and you'll hear a good, nice audible click. Give it a little tug, make sure it's good and fit. You want to make sure this route's over the DI connector and nice and clean, sitting just above all your wiring harness there. Now let's move to the driver's side and reconnect that side. All right, now we're over here on the driver's side, and we're going to get the heater line reconnected for this side. Now it's an aesthetic preference, it can be run on top, but I actually prefer, and for the nice neat appearance of it, we're going to run this heater line just underneath your EVAP purge solenoid. You'll tuck this line up here, get them lined up. And this is, of course, after you remove the little clip there from where it used to snip onto a bolt. You remove that clip, then you should be able to just push these together to be nice and neat and tucked real close up against the blower. That way it doesn't stick out. You want to then check and make sure your heater line's not binding or kinking anywhere. It's laying very, very nicely just above the fuel rail there and right beneath the EVAP purge solenoid. Once you click that together, give it a little tug, make sure it's good and tight and the O-ring has sealed up there. All right, now it's time to go ahead and install the intake tract, and that starts with the throttle body. Now this is where you'll actually see some differences between the Stage 1 and Stage 2 kit. Your Stage 2 kit, which is what we're installing on this particular vehicle, comes with a 112mm large monoblade throttle body, and I'll show you more about that in just a moment. The Stage 1 kit, and kind of show you what that looks like going together in case you're installing a Stage 1 kit. The first thing you're going to have is an adapter plate. And this comes with an O-ring. I've already installed it in there. You'll find that if you use a little bit of super lube or dielectric grease, you can hold that O-ring in place as you put this together. So you take your gasket, you'll install it on your plate, and then you've got 4 18mm long M6 bolts, and these use a 5mm Allen head. You can go ahead and pre-start those in your plate. And again, you're going to see me fiddling with this O-ring trying to keep it in place. I'm actually going to move it because I'm not going to fully install this throttle body. Move it out of the way. You'll align it with the inlet of the supercharger and hand start these 4 bolts. Once they're in place, you'll fasten them and you'll torque them to 88 inch-pounds. You then place your O-ring back in place if you hadn't already got it set with a little bit of dielectric grease or something of that nature to keep it in place. And then you'll take your included 92mm throttle body. That'll install there using 4 M6 35mm long bolts. That'll complete the installation for Stage 1 and getting the 92mm throttle body in place. But because this is a Stage 2, we're actually going to install the 112mm throttle body. So I'm going to get that plate off and out of the way, and we'll start with the Stage 2. So for the Stage 2 version of the VMP Gen 6 3.0 kit, you're going to be installing the 112mm throttle body. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our 45mm long M6 bolts and drop them in place. So they're going to help us align the gasket as we go to install this throttle body. So we'll stand this up and hold one of those bolts in place, and we'll take our gasket and go ahead and get it started on the hardware here. So once your bolts are through the gasket, you can take your 5mm Allen and use it to start these bolts into the inlet of the blower. You're going to want to start at least the top 2. And that'll help you align the bottom too. And that way your hardware and your gasket, that whole stack goes on simply. Now the Stage 2 is a bit simpler than the Stage 1 in how it goes together because it's just a gasket and throttle body instead of the adapter plate. Once these are all started, you can go ahead and tighten them down. And just out of habit, I like going in a crisscross pattern. And then torque these bolts to 88 inch-pounds. And you'll torque these in a crosshatch pattern. All right, that's the throttle body installed. Now that we've got our throttle body in place, we're going to go ahead and get the wiring sorted. So you have your harness. This is an adapter harness that we've added to the system. We added this earlier. You'll notice that the factory plug for your throttle body here has been taped up at a 90-degree angle, actually 180, but technically it's been taped up at an angle that we're not going to use. So we're going to cut that tape real quick and remove it off of the harness. That way this lays out straight. And then we're going to route this in a way that keeps it safe and out of the way of the belt drive. So what I like to do is I like to get it traced along the harness here, add a zip tie. This routes it down in kind of a way. And we want to use up the actual length of the harness to help route it safely out of the way. So it's our first zip tie there. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this plug in place and get it locked. So now that it's plugged in, you see that it kind of routes down here by the radiator hose. We're going to add one more zip tie to secure that down and away so it doesn't come in contact with the belt drive or the fan. So you get your zip tie down here in place, kind of get it semi-loose so you can move this as necessary to make sure there's no extra or added tension to the harness. Then go ahead and tighten that up. Use a pair of side cutters and cut the slack off the zip ties. Now your harness is routed for the throttle body and tucked safely out of the way so it doesn't come in contact with the belt drive or any other moving pieces. So now we're going to go ahead and install our air boxes. We're going to get them reinstalled and in place. So over here on the passenger side, you're going to use a flathead screwdriver to release this clip for this relay that's on the side of the BCM. So you can lay it up out of the way. You're probably going to want to go ahead and move the cap for the positive side over here out of the way. It's a little bit of a wrestling match, but we did this is not to move the BCM or risk any issues with it. So you take it and you're going to put it snout down first. And as that starts to go in, you can run your hand up here in the front and kind of guide it in. Now there's a rubber grommet on the little standoff on the back of the cold air box here. You're going to tip that in. And there's a little bracket that sits beneath your BCM. And that's where that grommet goes. And then remember the relay and fuse that we stuck back there. You're going to take its bolt tab and get it lined up with the bolt there. And then you'll grab your OEM 10mm bolt. You're going to run it down through the grommet here, through the relay's hole in its tab, and align it with the OEM location. This is going to fasten and secure your relay here. You're going to take a 10mm bolt, go ahead and tighten this up. Once it's good and tight, confirm your fitment there and there's nothing binding in your new hoses or anything like that. Let's move on to the driver's side. On the driver's side, this process is very similar. You're going to take your air box, go snout down first, and route it towards the front of the car. And as you come down, you're going to want to clear the hoses and press down as needed. You're going to notice the hole back here beside your engine coolant bottle. That's where the rubber grommet will press down in. Once that's in place, grab your factory hardware, the 10mm bolt. Come over and you'll get that started in place. Once it goes down and through the bottle into its bolt hole, you then grab your tool and go ahead and tighten that 10mm up. Now your air boxes are back in place. You can begin the assembly and installation of your air tube. So now that the air boxes are back in the car, we're going to build out our air intake track. Our air tubes from the car, its OEM air tubes, are now here with our mass airflow sensors, and we've got this laid out as if this is the front of the car facing towards the vehicle. This is the passenger side, this is the driver's side. We're going to transfer our factory mass airflow sensors over to our new mass airflow sensor housings. This would be the passenger side, this would be the driver's side. To make this happen, you have a T20 bit, that's to remove the factory screws. You're not going to reuse these factory screws. You've got provided M4 bolts. These bolts use a 3mm Allen, so we'll go ahead and get these mass airflow sensors out into the housings and tighten down. So as these come out of the factory tubes, take note of their orientation. You have a bell mouth here that points out towards the filter. Notice that the mass airflow sensor is pointing towards the filter here, so when you take it out, you're going to put the slot where the sensor is and match it up. It's pretty easy to get right, but it's also pretty easy to get wrong. You'll take your new hardware, go ahead and spin these in by hand. These don't need to be super tight. The spec is 17 inch-pounds, which is just over a foot-pound of torque. So it does not take much to secure these, and you do not want to crush or damage the sensors by over-tightening. So just lightly get them in there. That's the driver's side complete. Let's knock out the passenger side. Again, do not reuse your factory hardware. Take note of the flow direction. The sensors are even labeled as to which way the air flows. Since your filter is going to be out here on this end, you want the flow direction to mark this way, so take note of the arrow and drop it in the new housing. Again, these don't need a ton of torque, just want to get them snug. Now you can discard your factory air tubes or set them aside if you ever want to put the car back to stock. With our mass airflow sensor housings built out, now we're going to go ahead and build out the intake tube. First and foremost, you want to take your fitting for the crankcase ventilation. Go ahead and pop that over. This will be in that port that's on your Y tube just in front of the throttle body. You have a included worm geared clamp. We're going to leave that loose, but that goes up here in the throttle body position. That would have came in the box with the Y tube. We've got our 2 filters and our MAF housings here, as well as included worm gear clamps. So we're going to go ahead and put these in place. I like to scoot the actual bolt for it, which is an 8mm bolt. You use an 8mm socket on all these worm gear clamps. I like to scoot these onto the back side just so you can hide the hardware for a nice clean look once it's all installed. So you scoot that into place into the molded rib where that lives. You do that on both sides. Now that both of those in place, you grab your MAF housings, and again, the arrow on the mass airflow sensor will give you a notation of the direction. So this is the passenger side, and this is going to be the driver's side of the vehicle. Pop this into place, and these are a little bit tight, but not too bad. Again, take note of your flow direction. Go ahead and pop these into place. And then we'll open up our filters, but I want to show you something to take note of here on your filter. When you take them out of the plastic, they're pre-oiled, so you don't have to oil them or anything. But on the nose of the filter, you're going to have this notch. That notch indexes into a little standoff inside the air box. So you want this to point down. It's also going to hide your seam here, that metal seam, which looks bad if it's pointing up. So you know that's by default pointing down with your notch to align in the air box. You can go ahead and pop that onto your mass airflow sensor housing. It applies for both of them. You want to make sure that that notch is pointed down for both sides. And again, I'm not going to crank these down super tight. I'm actually going to leave these loose as well as the one for the throttle body, but I will tighten up these filters just a little bit so they don't fall off while we're going to assemble everything. All right, let's take this assembly and head over to the vehicle. So now we're over at the vehicle, and I find that the easiest way to install the Y tube onto the throttle body and get your filters and everything for your air intake track in the vehicle is to do it as one assembly. Again, we're leaving all the clamps loose so that it can move and settle in because you've got a couple things that have got to happen here. The notches on the bottom of the filter, these little stubs have to land in the very particular place. When you look in your air box, you'll see exactly where those need to settle down. You need to work this onto the throttle body. And if you did this piece by piece out like in the car, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to put together. Whereas if you assemble it on the table like we just did and leaving these clamps loose, it'll drop right in and settle. And the only thing that you've got to work on is actually installing the throttle body into the tube. So let's go ahead and drop this thing in. You rotate it over. And as that starts to settle, you want to go ahead and work your throttle body down around. You're going to notice that your filters and MAF housings rotate and kind of settle into their place. And then what you want to do is you want to line up your throttle body here. And as you start to press that on, I just bumped out the tube, watch out for that. But as you press that on, it has a tendency to want to try to fold under. So once you kind of press that up there, take your hand underneath and confirm that all the way around the tube hasn't folded, and not part of it's not in the throttle body or anything like that. Once you confirm that, the first thing you want to tighten up is the clamp right here at the throttle body. So you grab your 8mm and go ahead and run that down. So now that that's in place, you can start to slowly go to your air boxes, verify that your filter's notch. See, that notch did not land where it was supposed to. I'm going to loosen that filter up just a little bit, so the filter will spin for me and I can get the notch of the filter lined up in the air box. See, that just settled down. So now that that's in place, I can tighten that back up. I'm gonna go do the same on the other side. Loosen that up just a little bit. That'll allow the filter to settle. You run your hands down there and make sure your notch is on the bottom to line up in the air box. You'll feel it kind of settle down, and grab your clamp, 8mm. You'll tighten that up, and then you can go to each one of these 8 mils, position them in a way that you like how they look, and tighten them up on the mass airflow sensor housing. All right, our intake track is in. The next thing we're going to do is you got a fresh air vent, a crankcase, that's going to go right here in this location. We're going to get this tag off real quick and then we'll get it installed. All right, now that we've got that tag off, I'm going to take this tube, I'm going to run it underneath the intercooler hoses, and we'll rotate it around and it'll quick connect on that end, and then do the same thing here on the air intake tube. And you just want to move it around and make sure that there's not a kink in it. And pop it into your intake tube there. Now that your intake track is in place, we can go ahead and replace the 10mm bolts that hold the mass airflow sensor housings to the air boxes. Start over here. You want to start a couple threads so you don't just hammer this thing down and tear up the threads in the clip. Once it's started, grab your tool, tighten it up, and do the same for the other side. Line it up, get a couple threads started. Then you can go ahead and tighten it up. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and plug in our mass airflow sensors. Now your harnesses have these Christmas tree clips on them. You're not going to reuse that clip, so go ahead and snip that off. It's just a zip tie clip. You'll hit that and pop those out of the way. Then you'll orient the plug, press it in, and relock the clip. That side's done. Let's move over to the driver's side. Again, you're going to have one of these Christmas tree plugs. You're going to go ahead and take that off by cutting the zip tie portion of it. Move it out of the way. Then orient your plug, plug it in, and lock it. Now you can put your airbox lids on. These go on just like they came off. You put the two parts of the notches back there and flip up your two clips. Be a little tight on this side because of the BCM and the relay that's mounted on it. But you'll line those up, get it down, and pop up your two clips. Now your intake tract is complete. Now that everything's complete on the assembly, we're going to go ahead and refill the cooling systems. First the engine cooling system, then the air to water system for the intercooler. So pop the cap off. For this we're using an airlift system, and we're going to vacuum bleed these systems because it's the most effective way to ensure that you do not have any air pockets in your cooling systems. What you want to look for before you start putting coolant in the system is that when you pull a vacuum that you're able to pull 27 inches of mercury, and you want to ensure that that holds. If that vacuum holds, you have no leaks in the system and you're good to go ahead and start filling it up. Now we're going to utilize the vacuum to actually draw the coolant back into the system. Because we did not increase or decrease the size of the engine cooling system, there's been no modifications to that. We're actually, because we used a sterile, isolated container to remove the coolant from it, we're reinstalling that same coolant. Once the vacuum's all gone on the gauge, that ensures that your system is full. Verify that it comes up to the minimum and maximum coolant level in the bottle, and then you can replace your cap. Now we're going to complete the same process on the air to water side of the system with one little twist. We're actually going to use orange coolant instead of the yellow coolant, so you have a visual indicator. In the event of a leak, if you see orange on the ground, it's your air to water system. If you see green, the yellow color on the ground, it's your engine cooling system. So let's go ahead and draw a vacuum on this side of the system. All right, we ran that up to 27 inches of mercury. We're watching the gauge. It's not going down, so that ensures we have no leaks in our cooling system on the intercooler side. Now that we've completed that part of the process, we're going to go ahead and draw in the coolant. Once you've connected your fill line, go ahead and release the vacuum and it'll begin to draw in the coolant. The mix on this side should approximately be 70-30 with an antifreeze, just because you want to prevent any kind of freezing. That will do incredible damage to your intercooler cores and the rest of the air-to-water system. Aside from the antifreeze you put in there, you want distilled water. This helps avoid corrosion on the aluminum components within the system. Once the vacuum is completely depleted on the gauge, you can go ahead and remove the tool and put the cap on the system. One more quick note about your coolant systems. Once the car has been up and running, you're going to notice that these fluid levels drop. That's the release of any additional air that the airlift system didn't get. Even though we vacuum bled these systems, there's still the chance, because of these complex systems, thermostat, as well as dual intercooler core, so on and so forth. Both sides are very complicated. So you just want to keep an eye on your fluid levels and top off accordingly after a few drive cycles. Now that the supercharger installation is complete, we're going to start reassembling the car. You take your two 15mm nuts, go here on the strut tower, you go ahead and start your 13mm. Grab a ratcheting wrench and make easy work of these bolts here. Grab your 15mm socket. You can clip your battery cable back down onto that stud. You can reinstall your push clips. Next, you're going to take your active grille shutter frame that's been modified and reinstall the motor. This drops a clip in there, and then the Torx headed bolt. It's a T20. Will go back in place. You will, once you reinstall this, you will plug this back in to avoid codes or any issues. Now we can move this over to the car. So now you take your active grille shutter frame, you lift your harness up, because this needs to go across the top of it and be able to be plugged in. And you work it up into the factory position so you can get your 6 8mm bolts in. Go ahead and start the top two by hand, just to have it held in place before you run the rest of the bolts in. An 8mm on an extension helps immensely with this. Make sure your harness is routed where it's not bound up. You can get your other 4 bolts started and go ahead and get them tight. Once the bolts are tight, you can go ahead and push the Christmas tree clips back into the active grille shutter harness and plug in that actuator. Be a bit fiddly to get your hands in there, but just take your time. There we go. Now you're going to run the harness down and around and reconnect your CCM module, as well as your ambient air temp sensor. And you'll take the push clips and put them in their respective places. Now we'll reinstall the air ducts that go behind the grill. There was a vertical piece here that we removed earlier. This will no longer be in place because of your heat exchanger brackets, but you can separate your duct from that vertical piece and slide it in, and it will reclip into place like OEM. When you're sliding it in, look for it to go into the air box. Once it's in there, you can then use the push clips to reconnect it. Should line up and clip right in. You repeat the process for the driver's side. Now that you've completed the reassembly of everything underneath the bumper, you can go ahead and reinstall the front fascia of the vehicle. You start by gently lifting that up, angling the back down so it doesn't scratch the fenders. And your goal is to get it up here on the pins and align the 7 bolt holes using those pins. All right, and we've got that up there. Now you have some push clips here on the end of your weather stripping. Make sure those are fully seated in the weather stripping. Push those down in those push clips. You grab your 7mm bolts and you're going to head and get these started. It's best to just kind of slowly start them by hand, as you don't want to do any damage to the plastics as you reinstall this hardware. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch ratchet with a short extension on it to spin these in. I'll start from the center and work my way out. All right, those 7 bolts are in. Now on each side, we're going to gently lift up and we're going to align the bumper. You'll notice underneath the headlight, there's a series of protrusions here. You want to get the bumper cover above that. And then we're going to gently locate the Christmas tree clip. And begin to press that in. Because your wheel well liner is loose, you can reach up underneath that Christmas tree clip and give it a good firm push into place. And that'll hold the bumper on this side until we insert the hardware. Let's move to the other side and do the same. This is just a repeat of the same process we just completed on the passenger side. We're going to very gently lift the bumper cover up to where it gets over the headlight pieces there. We're going to slide that wheel well liner back so we can line up the Christmas tree clip and push that into place. And that's going to gently hold the bumper in place until we install the hardware. Now we're going to go ahead and get the hardware in that holds the bumper up right here at the fender. These are 2 10mm bolts. We're just going to put our hand down in here and actually start these by hand, and then we'll use a tool, a 10mm on a wobble and extensions, to get in here and get that tightened up. There's one. We'll grab the other one. Get our hand down in here and get that started. Feel free to take your free hand and actually reach down and lift the bumper, just to make it a little easier to get these started and threaded in here. You want to get them threaded as far as you can by hand so that you spend less time on the wrench, because it is a bit of a pain to get these bolts tightened up. Once you got them all the way tight by hand that you can, put your wrench down there and put your hand down in there to get the wrench onto the bolt, and you can hold it in place, and then you can begin to tighten them up. So there's one tight. We're going to go down to the second one. All right, we'll complete the same process on the other side. Now we're going to reinstall the underbody shield. You're going to slide it up. And it's got to get in front of the bumper vents, and then you push back slightly to get it to go behind the chin spoiler. Once you get that in place, you're going to line up your push pin locations. Go ahead and get your push pins in, and that'll hold it in place for you to start reinstalling your 8mm hardware. Once you've got all 22 fasteners started, you can go ahead and tighten them up. Just go around and double check and make sure every fastener is in place and every single one of them has been tightened down. Now we're going to put the 4 push clips back in place on each fender well. Let's move to the other side. Now we can put our radiator cover back on. Get it lined up with the push clip locations, and then reinstall your push clips. All right, and if you're installing the VMP Gen 6 3.0 liter supercharger kit and it happens to be the stage 2 kit, it's going to come with a fuel pump voltage booster. We're going to show you how to install that real quick. We've pulled the FPDM out of the car to show you the modifications that must be done to the plug in this particular application, but this can be done in the car. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with making the modifications to the FPDM.
Wash your eyes.
So what we're doing here is there is a standoff in the clip that's to guide a plug on it. We're removing that standoff using a set of side cutters. Once that modification has been made, our jumper harness will go right on the connector. So when you pull out your fuel pump voltage booster and get ready to install it, go ahead and pull the cap off the fuse and make sure that your 40 amp fuse is fully seated in that fuse holder, and then make sure your cap is fully secure on it. Once you've confirmed all these things and made the modifications to your fuel pump driver module, you can go ahead and install the Velcro on the back of the voltage booster itself. And this is going to hold it in place inside the interior of the car. Now we're going to leave the seal on the side of it until we get in the car and we're ready to place it in its permanent location. So let's move to the vehicle. So you start the installation of the fuel pump voltage booster by reaching underneath the driver's side trim panel by the rear seat and removing the foam block. This is going to make a home for the fuel pump voltage booster to live. Then you're going to remove the cover on the adhesive side of the Velcro on your fuel pump voltage booster so that you can permanently affix it behind that trim panel. Now you're actually going to stick the booster to the inside of that trim panel, and that's where it'll live. You want the harness side pointing down so that you can extend the harnesses out to the fuel pump driver module and you can reach an adequate location for a ground. You're going to take your ground wire and you're going to find an adequate location and take some sandpaper to clean up the surface so that you can make a good ground connection. This is incredibly important because without a good ground you'll create heat and other problems such as failure of the voltage booster. So we're actually sanding the location of one of the studs for the voltage booster, and we're going to use that to make our ground connection. Once you've connected your ground using the mounting hardware for the fuel pump driver module, you can go ahead and reinstall your fuel pump driver module. Make sure that when you bolt down your fuel pump driver module and you connect your ground, that it lays square and flat, and part of the eyelets connection and crimp connection is not pinched under there. You want a good secure connection. Now we're going to connect in the jumper harness. This bridges your fuel pump voltage booster into your FPDM. Then you're going to connect the power side. This 2-wire orange and red wire connector jumps into the jumper, and that feeds voltage to your driver module. This completes the installation of your fuel pump voltage booster. You can now reinstall the rear seat. Be sure to reach underneath the seat and guide your seat belts back through the holes in the seat cushion. And then with a firm press on each side, you'll feel it click back into place. For the icing on the cake, we're going to go ahead and get the wheels back on the car. Once the car is back together, you can go ahead and reconnect your battery cables and put the battery cover back on. So that completes the installation of the VMP Gen 6 3-liter supercharger kits, both stage 1 and stage 2. The only things left to do is flash in your calibration, heat cycle the car and check your fluid levels, and then take it on its first drive. We thank you so much for your business and support. For more information like this, more install videos, cool content, dyno results, and things like that, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.